This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't believe I'm actually writing this down. For months, I've been lurking on forums like this one, reading other people's experiences, trying to find something similar to what happened to my family. I guess I finally worked up the courage to share our story. I'm not looking for validation or anything. Honestly, part of me wishes someone would tell me there's a logical explanation for everything we experienced. But I know what we saw, what I saw. It all started last spring when my mom dragged us to this neighborhood yard sale. She's always been into that kind of thing. Vintage furniture, antiques, stuff with character as she calls it. Our house is fairly new, only built about 8 years ago, but Mom's been filling it with old pieces to give it warmth. Usually I just trailed behind her, bored out of my mind. But that day something caught my eye too. It was this beautiful old vanity dresser with an ornate mirror. The wood was this rich mahogany color with intricate carvings along the edges. The mirror itself was slightly clouded with age, giving it this dreamy quality. Even I had to admit it was gorgeous. The elderly woman selling it practically gave it away. $50 for something that probably cost hundreds when it was new. Mom was ecstatic. Looking back, I should have noticed how quickly the woman wanted to get rid of it, how she didn't even try to haggle like she did with everything else we looked at. Dad and my older brother Carlos lugged it into our living room that afternoon. Mom thought it would look nice in the entryway, a place to drop keys and mail. For the first few days, everything was normal. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the mirror as I walked past, nothing unusual. Then, about a week after we brought it home, I was home alone after school. My younger sister Anna was at soccer practice, and my parents were still at work. I was sitting on the couch doing homework when I felt this weird sensation, like someone was watching me. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? That's what it was like. I looked up and my eyes immediately went to the mirror on the dresser. At first, I didn't see anything strange, just my own reflection sitting on the couch. But then I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold. Behind me in the reflection, there was this pale white figure. It wasn't fully formed, more like an outline of a person with these deep black holes where the eyes should be. I froze completely. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I looked again, it was gone. I convinced myself I was just tired from staying up late studying the night before. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I didn't tell anyone at first. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I saw a ghost in our new dresser mirror. They'd think I was crazy, so I kept it to myself and tried to avoid looking at the dresser whenever possible. A few days later, I was sitting in the living room with Anna. She's 13, 4 years younger than me, and usually annoying as hell. But we were actually having a good time watching some stupid reality show. I happened to glance at the mirror, and there it was again. That same pale figure with black eyes slowly materializing behind me. This time it seemed more solid, more real. My heart started racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if this was actually happening. So I turned to Anna and said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Anna, can you look at the mirror and tell me if you see anything weird?" She looked at me like I was being stupid, but turned toward the mirror anyway. The color drained from her face instantly. Her eyes went wide, and she started crying. Not like fake crying to get attention, but real, terrified sobbing. "There's someone there," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Behind you, Maria. There's someone there." That was all the confirmation I needed. We both ran upstairs to my room and locked the door. When our parents came home, we tried to explain what we'd seen, but they just exchanged that look parents give each other when they think their kids are being dramatic. My dad checked the house, told us there was nobody there, and that was that. But it wasn't the end. Not even close. The nightmares started that night. I dreamed about the pale figure standing at the foot of my bed, those black pits for eyes staring down at me. I woke up screaming at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat. My older sister Elena came rushing in. She's 18 and usually too cool to care about anything, but even she looked freaked out. "I had the same dream," she whispered, sitting on the edge of my bed, "about some white thing with black eyes." That's when I knew for sure something was seriously wrong. How could we both have the same nightmare? And it got worse from there. The next night, I experienced what I now know was sleep paralysis. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to move a single muscle. My eyes darted around the room in panic, and that's when I saw it. The same pale entity from the mirror was outside my window, peering in. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. I watched in horror as it somehow passed through the glass like it wasn't even there. It moved toward my bed in jerky, unnatural movements. Its face was featureless except for those horrible black eyes. Not just dark, but like empty voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them. It leaned over me, so close I could feel the cold radiating from it. Then it breathed on my face, a rotten, musty smell like old books left in a damp basement. I passed out from fear, and when I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it had just been a nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. After a week of this, my parents finally decided to move the dresser out of the living room. Not because they believed us about the entity, but because they were tired of Anna and me refusing to stay in the living room alone. They put it in Anna's room, thinking it would look nice with her other furniture. That poor kid. She started sleeping facing the wall because she said she could see it in the mirror watching her while she tried to sleep. She'd only use the mirror when absolutely necessary, like when getting ready for school, and even then she'd say she could see it forming in the corners of the mirror while she did her makeup. My parents still thought we were overreacting, making up stories. Dad joked that we'd been watching too many horror movies. Mom suggested we were feeding off each other's imagination, but they couldn't explain away what happened next. It was a regular Tuesday evening. Mom was making dinner, and Anna was sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework. I was upstairs but heard Anna's scream from all the way in my room. I raced downstairs to find both Anna and Mom, white as sheets, staring at the oven door. Between gasps, Anna explained that she'd looked up from her homework and seen the entity standing behind Mom, its reflection visible in the kitchen window above the sink. When she gasped and screamed, Mom had turned around and seen nothing, but then caught a glimpse of the pale figure with black eyes reflected in the glass door of the oven before it darted away. That was the turning point. Mom finally believed us, and Dad couldn't deny something was happening anymore. The activity in the house escalated after that. It was like once we all acknowledged its existence, it gained power. Doors would shut by themselves. Kitchen cabinets would be open in the morning when we were sure they'd been closed the night before. Pictures would fall off walls for no reason. We'd hear voices whispering from empty rooms, unintelligible words that sent chills down my spine. The knocking was the worst. It would start around 11 at night, 3 distinct knocks from different parts of the house. First from the living room, then the kitchen, then upstairs. Like whatever this thing was, it was making its rounds through our home. We'd hear footsteps in the hallway when everyone was accounted for. Our dog Rex refused to go into certain rooms and would growl at empty corners. One night, I woke up to find Anna standing by my bed, crying silently. "It was sitting on my dresser," she whispered, "just watching me. I can't go back in there." She slept in my room that night and many nights after. Eventually, my parents let her move into the guest room temporarily, but the entity followed her. It didn't seem tied to the room, it was tied to the dresser. Carlos, my older brother who had initially laughed at our ghost stories, stopped laughing when he woke up one night to find his closet door open and what he described as a white face with black holes for eyes peeking out at him. He slept with his lights on after that. The final straw came about 2 months after we bought the dresser. We were all sitting in the living room watching a movie, trying to pretend everything was normal, when every light in the house went out simultaneously. Not just the electricity, our phones died too. In the pitch darkness, we heard a scraping sound from upstairs, like furniture being dragged across the floor. Then Anna screamed. Following her gaze, we all saw it. The pale figure standing at the top of the stairs, fully visible now even without a mirror. It was humanoid but wrong somehow, its proportions slightly off, its movements jerky and unnatural. Those black eyes seemed to stare right through us. For what felt like an eternity, we sat frozen in terror. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The lights came back on, our phones powered up again, and we were left shaking and clinging to each other. The next day, Dad took the dresser to the dump despite Mom's protests about wasting good furniture. He came back looking shaken. He wouldn't tell us exactly what happened there, just that he was certain getting rid of it was the right decision. The activity stopped immediately after the dresser was gone. No more sightings, no more noises, no more nightmares, but none of us has fully recovered. Anna still won't sleep alone. I still check mirrors carefully before looking directly into them. Carlos sleeps with a nightlight even though he'd die before admitting it to his friends. We tried researching the dresser afterward, hoping to find out where it came from originally. The woman we bought it from claimed her deceased aunt had owned it, but when we tracked down other family members, they said the aunt never owned such a piece. No one seemed to know its true origins. It's been 6 months now, and our house feels normal again, but sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I still catch a glimpse of something pale with dark eyes. It's probably just my imagination, a leftover fear from what we went through. At least, that's what I tell myself. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was attached to that dresser didn't leave with it, that it's still here, watching us from the shadows, from the corners of mirrors, waiting for us to forget about it so it can return. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I swear I can still hear those 3 distinct knocks. Story 2. I still get goosebumps when I think about what happened that winter in Ohio. I was 12 at the time, and even though it's been years, I can't shake the memory of what we saw that night. I've never told many people about this because, well, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest. It was one of those brutally cold January evenings where the wind cuts right through your clothes. My stepsister, Allie, who was 14 then, wanted to go to some youth group meeting with her boyfriend, Evan. My mom was working late and Allie was supposed to watch me, but she really wanted to go to this thing. After begging my mom over the phone, Allie got permission to take me along. "It'll be fun," she promised. "There's games and free pizza." I didn't want to go. It was freezing outside, and the youth group was for high schoolers. I'd just be the annoying little sister tagging along. But I didn't have a choice. The walk there was miserable. It was already dark by 5:30, and the temperature had dropped even further. My fingers were numb inside my gloves, and my face hurt from the wind. Allie and Evan walked ahead of me, holding hands and giggling about whatever 14-year-olds giggle about. I trudged behind them, watching my breath form clouds in front of my face. "How much farther?" I called out after we'd been walking for what felt like forever. "Just a couple more blocks," Evan said, pointing ahead. "It's at that community center near the park." When we finally arrived, I was relieved to get out of the cold. The building was a simple 1-story place, the kind that hosts community events and local government meetings, but something felt off right away. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no people, no sounds of a youth group meeting in progress. "Are you sure it's tonight?" Allie asked Evan, rubbing her arms for warmth. Evan checked his phone, scrolling through messages. His face fell. "Oh crap. It's next week. I got the dates mixed up." I wanted to scream. We'd walked all that way for nothing, and now we had to walk all the way back in the freezing cold. Allie looked annoyed too, but she tried not to show it. "Well, we're here now," she said. "Let's at least rest for a few minutes before heading back. Maybe there's a way to get inside and warm up." The building had these long glass doors at both ends of the main corridor. You could see straight through from one end to the other. There was a single light on in the hallway, casting this eerie glow. The rest of the building was dark. I remember thinking it was weird that a light would be on if nobody was there. Allie went up to the door first and peered inside. I was a few steps behind her, stomping my feet to get some feeling back in my toes. I didn't notice anything was wrong until I heard her sudden intake of breath. When I looked up, her hand was over her mouth and her eyes were wide. "What?" I asked, suddenly alert. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She just kept staring through the glass, completely frozen. Evan moved next to her. "What are you looking at?" He pressed his face against the glass to see better. After a few seconds, his expression changed too. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Do you see that? There's someone in there." "What do you mean?" I asked, moving closer. I thought they were trying to scare me. Ali was always pulling pranks like that. "There's a person," Evan said, his voice shaking slightly. "At the end of the hallway. They're really tall." "You guys are just trying to freak me out," I said, but something in their faces told me they weren't joking. "Emily, come look," Ali whispered, stepping aside slightly so I could see. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to look, but curiosity won out. I stepped up to the door and peered through the glass. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just an empty hallway with that single light. Then I saw movement at the far end, and my blood turned to ice. There was something there. I say something because my brain couldn't process it as a person. It was crouched down, but even crouching, it seemed too tall. As I watched, it began to stand up. Its limbs were wrong. Arms and legs far too long and thin, unfolding like a spider rising from its web. It wore what looked like a dark suit, but the proportions were all wrong. The body was impossibly thin and stretched. Its skin, what I could see of it on its hands and head, was pale white, almost glowing under the hallway light. But the face, there was no face, just a blank, smooth surface where features should be. As it rose to its full height, its head nearly touched the ceiling. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. Then it started moving its arms, not like a person would, but frantically, waving them in these jerky, unnatural motions. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at this thing that shouldn't exist. "We need to go," Ali whispered, grabbing my arm. "Right now." But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The thing in the hallway turned slightly, and even though it had no eyes, I felt like it was looking right at us. That's when my legs finally worked again. I stumbled backward, nearly falling on the icy sidewalk. "What the hell was that?" I gasped. "I don't know," Evan said. His face was pale, but it looked like Slender Man, I finished for him. I knew about the creepypasta stories. Kids at school talked about them all the time. But Slender Man wasn't real. He was made up for a contest on some website. Everyone knew that. "That's impossible," Ali said, shaking her head. "That's just internet stuff. It can't be real." We stood there in the cold, staring at each other, none of us wanting to look back through the door. Part of me thought we should just run, get as far away as possible. But another part of me, the part that makes people do stupid things in horror movies, wanted to know more. "Maybe we should check the other door," Evan suggested, his voice barely audible over the wind, "just to be sure we're not seeing things." "Are you crazy?" I hissed. "I'm not going anywhere near that thing again." "We'll just walk around the building," Ali said, trying to sound brave. "We don't have to look in. We'll just check if there's a car or something that might explain who's in there." It was a terrible idea, but we did it anyway. We started walking around the perimeter of the building, staying close together. I refused to look through any of the windows we passed, keeping my eyes fixed on the ground, but I could feel Evan and Ali glancing inside every chance they got. When we were about halfway around, I heard it, a soft tapping noise, like fingernails on glass. Tap, 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 then silence, then tap, tap, tap again. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Ali nodded, her face ghostly in the moonlight. "It's coming from inside." We picked up our pace, practically jogging by the time we reached the other end of the building. There was another set of glass doors there, identical to the first. "Don't look," I begged them. "Please, can we just go home?" But Evan was already peering through the glass. After a moment, he stepped back. "I don't see anything now," he said. "The hallway's empty." "Are you sure?" Ali asked, stepping up to look herself. I stayed back, watching their faces. "Is it gone?" Ali nodded slowly. I don't see anything, but she trailed off, frowning. But what? I pressed. The light's off now. The hallway's completely dark. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was on just a few minutes ago. Maybe it's on a timer, Evan suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We stood there for a moment, none of us knowing what to do. Then Allie grabbed my hand. Let's go home. Right now. We practically ran the whole way back, not talking, just moving as fast as we could through the snow and ice. Every shadow made me jump. Every sound made my heart race. I kept expecting to see that thing following us, those impossible long limbs carrying it effortlessly through the darkness. When we got home, we didn't talk about what we'd seen. We just went to our rooms and tried to pretend nothing had happened. I slept with my lights on that night and for many nights after. The next day, I almost convinced myself we'd imagined it. Some trick of the light, or our minds playing tricks in the cold and dark. But when I saw Allie at breakfast, the look on her face told me it had been real. Was that a prank? I asked her when we were alone. Did you and Evan set that up to scare me? She shook her head, not meeting my eyes. I wish it was, Em. I really do. But it couldn't have been. You know, that's not real. It's just a story people made up. I know, she said quietly. But what else could it have been? Did you see how tall it was? How it moved? I didn't have an answer for her. Neither of us did. Years later, after Allie and I had both moved away for college, I finally brought it up again. We were home for Christmas, sitting on the porch swing late at night, catching up on our lives. Do you remember that night? I asked her. At the community center? She knew exactly what I meant. I could see it in her eyes. I try not to, she admitted. I need to know. Was it real? Did we really see something? Or was it just some weird shared hallucination? Allie was quiet for a long time. I've never seen anything like it before or since, she finally said. But Evan saw it too. We talked about it once, a few months after it happened. He described exactly what I saw, what you saw. But what was it? I pressed. She shrugged, pulling her sweater tighter around her. I don't know, Em. I really don't. I've tried to find logical explanations. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. Maybe it was some kind of projection or shadow, but nothing explains how it moved or why it had no face. We sat in silence after that, both lost in our memories. The thing is, I still don't have an explanation. I've researched everything from mental health phenomena to shared hallucinations to local Ohio legends. Nothing fits. Nothing explains what we saw that night. Sometimes I wonder if we should have told someone, called the police, or reported it somewhere. But who would have believed us? 3 kids claiming they saw what amounts to an internet boogeyman in an empty building. All I know is what I saw, that impossibly tall, thin figure, those unnaturally long limbs, the blank face that somehow still felt like it was watching us. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howls outside my window, I still hear that tapping sound, tap, 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 like something trying to get in. Story 3. I still get chills thinking about what happened at Dee's house 4 years ago. I've never told this story publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. Dee and I became friends in our sophomore year of high school. We bonded over video games and our shared love of music. At the time, things at my house were really tense. My parents were fighting constantly, and my dad's drinking was getting worse. Being at home felt like walking on eggshells, never knowing when the next explosion would happen. Dee's house became my sanctuary. His parents were pretty chill and didn't mind me hanging around all the time. They had this small guest bedroom right next to Dee's room, and I started crashing there more and more. Eventually, I even moved my gaming PC over. Dee's mom joked that they should start charging me rent, but I could tell she didn't mind. She knew what was going on at my place. The first time I noticed something weird was about 3 months after I started staying over regularly. I was alone in the house one afternoon. Dee had basketball practice, and his parents were both at work. I was in the guest room playing Counter-Strike when I heard what sounded like footsteps in the attic directly above me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Old houses make noise, right? But then the footsteps continued, and they weren't random creaks. They sounded deliberate, like someone wearing heavy boots walking slowly across the floor. The best way I can describe it is like pirate boots on a wooden boat. That distinct heavy thud followed by a slight creak. I paused my game and just listened. The footsteps continued for about 20 seconds, then stopped. I convinced myself it was just the house settling or maybe squirrels or something. But deep down, I knew that explanation didn't fit what I'd heard. I didn't mention it to Dee that night. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But over the next few weeks, I kept hearing those footsteps, always when I was alone, always in the attic above the guest room. Sometimes they'd start in one corner and walk to another. Other times, they'd pace back and forth directly above where I was sitting. One day, about a month after the first incident, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I was in the kitchen getting a snack. The footsteps started in the attic above the kitchen. I froze, listening. Then I slowly walked back toward the guest room. The footsteps followed me, tracking my movement perfectly from above. When I stopped, they stopped. When I continued walking, they continued. My heart was racing. I decided to test it. I took 3 steps forward, then quickly took 2 steps back. The footsteps matched my movement exactly, 3 forward, 2 back. It wasn't just following me, it was anticipating my movements like it could read my thoughts. That night, I finally told Dee about what I'd been hearing. He laughed it off, saying the house was old and that I was probably just hearing the pipes or the wood expanding and contracting. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I'd heard. The worst incident happened on a Saturday morning in April. Dee's parents had gone grocery shopping and Dee was still asleep. I woke up early and was in the guest room browsing Reddit on my laptop. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like someone aggressively running across the attic floor, directly toward the area above me. The footsteps were faster and heavier than before, like someone sprinting with all their might. Then came a crash so violent that dust fell from the ceiling. It sounded like someone had dropped a 200-pound weight right above my head. The whole house seemed to shake. I jumped up, my heart pounding out of my chest. I was sure Dee would come running in to see what had happened, but he didn't. I walked to his room and found him still sound asleep with his headphones on. I woke him up and told him what happened. This time, he couldn't dismiss it so easily. The crash had been too loud, too physical. We decided to check the attic. The attic access was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. Dee climbed up first, and I followed, my whole body trembling. The attic was dusty and filled with old boxes and Christmas decorations. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, undisturbed. If someone had been running up here, there should have been footprints in the dust, but there weren't any. We searched the entire attic and found nothing that could explain the crash. But in the far corner, directly above the guest room, we discovered something strange, a small black box about the size of a shoebox. It looked old, made of some kind of polished black wood with no markings or decorations. It was sitting perfectly centered in the corner, with no dust on top of it despite the dust covering everything else in the attic. "What's this?" I asked. "Dee," he shrugged. "Never seen it before. Probably just some old stuff my parents stored up here." I wanted to open it, but something held me back. A feeling of dread washed over me when I got close to it. Dee must have felt it too, because he suggested we leave it alone and go back downstairs. We never mentioned the box to his parents, and I still regret that. The incidents continued, but they were sporadic enough that I managed to convince myself I was overreacting, until the week Dee's family went on vacation to visit his grandparents in Florida. I stayed behind to look after their dog Peter, a friendly golden retriever who'd never been anything but sweet and calm. The first couple of days were fine, but on the third night, around 11, I was watching TV in the living room when Peter suddenly stood up, his fur bristling. He started growling at the empty hallway leading to the bedrooms. I muted the TV. "What is it, boy?" Peter began barking aggressively, something I'd never seen him do before. His eyes were fixed on something in the hallway that I couldn't see. I turned on all the lights and checked the hallway, but there was nothing there. Peter wouldn't calm down for almost an hour, and when he finally did, he stayed unnaturally close to me for the rest of the night. The next morning I woke up to find Peter standing at the edge of the guest room, whimpering and refusing to come inside. I had to carry him out to the backyard to do his business, and even then he kept looking back at the house anxiously. That day, the footsteps in the attic were almost constant. They followed me everywhere I went in the house. At one point I shouted up at the ceiling, "Leave me alone!" The footsteps stopped immediately, but then came 3 loud, deliberate knocks as if in response. I was terrified but had nowhere else to go. My parents were in the middle of their worst fight yet, and I couldn't face going home, so I stayed, keeping all the lights on and Peter close by my side. The final night before Dee's family was due to return was when it all came to a head. I was trying to sleep in the guest room with Peter on the floor beside me. Around 2 in the morning, Peter suddenly jumped up and ran out of the room, barking frantically. I heard him running down the hallway, into the living room, still barking. I grabbed my phone for light and followed him. When I reached the living room, what I saw made my blood run cold. Peter's food bowl, which was normally kept in the kitchen next to his water dish, was sitting perfectly centered in the middle of the living room floor. It was filled to overflowing with dog food, forming a neat pyramid that rose several inches above the rim of the bowl. Peter was circling it, growling. I know how this sounds, but I swear on everything I believe in that I didn't move that bowl. There was no way Peter could have done it himself either. Someone, or something, had deliberately placed it there and filled it with far more food than the bowl could normally hold. I backed away, Peter following me closely. We spent the rest of the night locked in the guest room, with me sitting up against the door, jumping at every creak and sound. When Dee's family returned the next day, I made up an excuse about needing to help my mom with something and went home. I never told Dee what happened that final night. I never stayed at his house alone again. Over the next few months, I gradually spent less time there. The footsteps continued, but only when I was there. Dee never heard them when he was alone. Whatever was in that house seemed fixated solely on me. I later found out some disturbing things about Dee's family. His older brother, who I'd never met because he was away at college, had serious drug problems and had once performed some kind of occult ritual in the house as a joke. Dee's father had a gambling addiction that was tearing the family apart financially. There was a darkness in that house that went beyond the paranormal incidents I experienced. I came to believe that the negative energy from Dee's family's problems had attracted something to that house, something that latched onto me specifically. Maybe because I was vulnerable due to my own family issues, or maybe, as strange as it sounds, because I was raised in a Christian household and this thing saw me as an intruder. I eventually drifted apart from Dee completely. Last I heard, his parents got divorced, and he moved away with his mom. I sometimes wonder if they experienced anything strange after I stopped coming around, or if whatever was there was only interested in tormenting me. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house. The way the footsteps followed my movements before I even made them, the crash that shook the house but left no trace, the mysterious black box, Peter's bizarre behavior, and that dog bowl in the middle of the living room, overflowing with food. Sometimes I think about going back, just to see if I'd still feel that presence. But then I remember the sound of those footsteps, like pirate boots on a wooden deck, and I know I never will. Story 4. I still can't explain what happened that night in Pinehaven. It's been 3 months, and I've gone back to that spot in the woods several times since then, but only during daylight hours. I can't bring myself to go at night anymore. I've lived in Pinehaven for about 2 years now. It's a small rural town where everyone knows everyone, but I mostly keep to myself. Shortly after moving here, I discovered this amazing clearing in the woods on top of a hill that overlooks fields stretching to the horizon. It quickly became my favorite spot to escape and clear my head. I'd go there at all hours, sometimes in the morning to watch the sunrise, sometimes in the afternoon to read a book, but most often at night to stargaze. The night sky in Pine Haven is incredible. Without much light pollution, you can see thousands of stars, and I'd spend hours just lying there looking up. That night, it was a Tuesday in late October, I was feeling particularly restless in my apartment. Work had been stressful, and I needed to get out. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to head to my spot. The temperature had dropped significantly that week, but I bundled up in a heavy jacket, grabbed my backpack with some snacks and water, and headed out. I've always prided myself on having good night vision, so I rarely used a flashlight on these trips. The moon was just a sliver that night, and it was honestly pitch black, but I knew the way by heart. The trail starts at the edge of town, winds through some dense woods for about 20 minutes, and then opens up to this beautiful clearing. On the way there, you pass this old farm property. I'd never seen anyone there. No animals, no vehicles, nothing. Just a weathered farmhouse, a dilapidated barn, and some fencing. I'd always assumed it was abandoned. That night, though, something was different. As I approached the farm, this smell hit me. Strong, musky, like farm animals. It was unmistakable, that earthy, almost sweet smell of livestock. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, thinking maybe someone had moved in and brought animals with them, but there were no lights on in the farmhouse, no sounds of animals moving around, just darkness and this overpowering smell. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure it out. Maybe the wind was carrying the smell from somewhere else, but it hadn't been particularly windy that night. It was strange, but I shrugged it off and continued toward the clearing. When I finally reached my spot, I noticed something else unusual. There were the remains of a campfire, not completely out, but reduced to glowing embers under a layer of ash. In the 2 years I'd been coming here, I'd never seen evidence of anyone else using this spot. It was kind of my secret place, or so I thought. I noticed a stack of firewood nearby that I hadn't seen before. Since the embers were still hot, I figured whoever had been there couldn't have left too long ago. I decided to take advantage of the situation and rekindled the fire. It took a bit of effort, but soon I had a decent flame going. The fire provided just enough light to set up my little area. I spread out my jacket to sit on and pulled out my snacks, just some chips and a candy bar. I laid back and started stargazing while occasionally feeding twigs into the fire to keep it alive. For about 2 hours, I just relaxed there. The stress from work melted away as I watched satellites drift across the sky and tried to identify constellations. Eventually, the fire died down, and I ran out of wood. I didn't mind, though. I was comfortable just lying there in the darkness, feeling at peace. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Distinct footsteps on the gravel road that ran near the clearing. It was probably around midnight at this point, maybe a little later. The footsteps sounded steady, not rushing, just someone walking at a normal pace. At first, I wasn't alarmed. I figured it was probably the person who had left the fire earlier, coming back to their spot. But then I realized that in the pitch darkness, they probably couldn't see me. I didn't want to startle them by suddenly speaking up, so I stayed quiet, listening as the footsteps got closer. The weird thing was, the footsteps passed by my position without slowing down. They continued down the path that led back toward town. I still couldn't see anyone. It was too dark, but I could clearly hear them walking away. Curiosity got the better of me. I gathered my things, stuffed them in my backpack, and started following the sound. I wasn't trying to be creepy. I just figured we were both heading back to town anyway, and maybe it was someone I knew. I kept a reasonable distance behind them, following the sound of their footsteps on the gravel. We were heading in the direction of town, passing through the wooded area between my clearing and the abandoned farm. And then, without any warning, the footsteps stopped. Not gradually, like someone slowing down. They just ceased completely, mid-stride. I stopped too, thinking maybe they had heard me and were waiting to see who was following them. "Hello?" I called out. "Sorry if I startled you. I was just up at the clearing too." Nothing. Absolute silence. I took a few more steps forward, straining my eyes to see in the darkness. "I'm just heading back to town," I said, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. Still nothing. Not a sound. I continued walking, figuring they must have stepped off the path for some reason, maybe to let me pass. But as I moved forward, there was no sign of anyone. No rustling in the bushes, no movement, nothing. I kept going, passing by the old farm again. That smell was still there, maybe even stronger than before. I paused at the farm's driveway, looking toward the dark shapes of the buildings. Something felt off about the whole situation, and I found myself turning around, staring back into the darkness I'd just come through. I waited there for a couple of minutes, expecting to see someone emerge from the darkness. No one did. The silence was absolute. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, no breathing besides my own, just complete stillness. That's when it really hit me how strange this was. If someone had been walking ahead of me and heard my footsteps behind them, they would have reacted somehow. They might have walked faster, turned around to look, or made some kind of noise if they'd left the road. But there was nothing. It was like they had completely vanished. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. I turned back toward town and started walking quickly, no longer caring about making noise. In fact, I wanted to make noise, to break the unnatural silence that had settled around me. As I walked, my mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe they had a flashlight I couldn't see and had taken a turn off the main path, but I hadn't seen any light, and there weren't any side paths in that section of woods. Maybe they were hiding. But why would someone hide from a random person also walking back to town? I was about halfway back to town when I heard it again. Footsteps, but this time they were behind me. The same steady pace, not hurried, just the distinctive sound of shoes on gravel. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned around slowly, squinting into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice noticeably shakier than before. The footsteps stopped immediately, just like before, an abrupt cease, not a gradual slowdown. I stood there, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. After what felt like an eternity but was probably just a minute or two, I turned back toward town and started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps didn't resume. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was only darkness behind me. I was almost running by the time the lights of Pine Haven came into view. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and sat on my couch, trying to make sense of what had happened. The footsteps, the sudden silence, the abandoned farm with the inexplicable animal smell, none of it added up. I've tried to rationalize it countless times since then. Maybe I was more tired than I realized, and my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe there was someone else in the woods who was just as freaked out by me as I was by them. Maybe the wind carried sounds in strange ways that night. But none of these explanations feel right. There's something about the way those footsteps just stopped, not faded, not changed direction, just ceased to exist, that I can't explain. And the timing of it all, the still warm fire, the strange smell at the farm that had never been there before, the perfect silence of the woods. I've talked to a few locals about the old farm since then, trying to be casual about it. Most people say it's been abandoned for at least 15 years. The previous owners moved away after some financial troubles, and no one's lived there since. One elderly man at the local diner told me there were rumors about the place being haunted, but he laughed it off as small-town nonsense. I still go to my clearing, but only during daylight hours now. I've never seen evidence of anyone else using the spot again. No more campfires, no stacked wood. And the farm always looks the same, empty, silent, with no trace of that strange animal smell. I don't know what I encountered that night on the gravel road in Pine Haven. All I know is that something was there with me in those woods, something that could appear and disappear without a trace, something that followed the same path I did, something that shouldn't have been possible. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my apartment, steady, unhurried, and stopping abruptly when I get up to check. Story 5. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but it's been eating at me for 10 years, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of what happened. Back in 2013, I was working at the flagship Goodwill store in downtown Seattle. This wasn't just any Goodwill, it was the oldest one in the city, this massive 3-story monster of a building. We're talking about a place that was around 100,000 square feet of donated stuff. Everything from clothes to furniture to weird knickknacks people didn't want anymore. I was 24, just trying to make ends meet while finishing my degree. The overnight shift paid a bit more, and I needed the money, so I volunteered to work it twice a week. None of the other employees wanted those shifts. At first, I thought they were just being lazy, but looking back, I think they knew something I didn't. The first few overnight shifts were uneventful. Just me sorting donations, organizing shelves, and cleaning up. The usual stuff. But after about 3 weeks, things started getting weird. At first, it was just small things. Items I'd placed on one shelf would somehow end up on another by morning. I figured maybe I was just tired and misremembering where I put stuff. Then came the noises. Footsteps when nobody was there. The sound of hangers sliding across racks in sections I wasn't working in. Sometimes whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I told myself it was just the building settling, or maybe the pipes, or the ventilation system. Old buildings make noise, right? But what happened on April 16, 2013, that was something else entirely. I was working the overnight shift, just like normal. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because we always got a ton of donations on Tuesdays, and I'd spent most of the evening sorting through them. Around midnight, I decided to take a break from the donations and do some cleaning in the back area, the part of the store that's employees only, behind the sales floor. This back area was huge, with narrow corridors between towering shelves of inventory waiting to be priced and put out. The building itself dated back to the early 1900s, and you could feel the age in these back rooms. The uneven wooden floors, the exposed brick walls, the ancient ceiling pipes that occasionally dripped water into strategically placed buckets. I was sweeping near the hallway that led to the administrative offices when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a person walking slowly down the corridor toward the manager's office. My first thought was, what the hell? Nobody should be back here. I was supposed to be alone in the building, and this area was strictly off limits to customers, even during business hours. I called out, "Hey, this area's employees only." My voice echoed against the brick walls. The figure stopped for a split second and looked over their shoulder at me. Even in the dim lighting, I could see that something was off. The person was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned suit, not modern at all, but the kind you'd see in photos from the early 1900s. Dark wool, high collar, with a weird hat that nobody's worn for like 100 years. Initially I thought, great, some hipster wandered in. Seattle's full of people who dress in vintage clothes, so while it was strange, it wasn't completely shocking. What was shocking was that they completely ignored me and kept walking toward the manager's office. That's when I got mad. The manager's office had confidential employee information, store records, safe combinations, stuff nobody should have access to except authorized personnel. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, dropping my broom and running after them. The figure was maybe 30 feet ahead of me, and I saw them round the corner toward the office. I ran faster than I probably ever have in my life. The distance couldn't have taken me more than 5 or 6 seconds to cover. I turned the corner, ready to confront whoever this trespasser was, and nothing. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. The only way out of that corridor was through the door to the employee courtyard, a small break area surrounded by 20-foot walls. The courtyard was completely enclosed by the Goodwill building on 2 sides and connected to 2 other buildings on the remaining sides. There was no way out except back through the building. As I stood there trying to make sense of what was happening, I heard the distinct sound of the courtyard door closing, that heavy metal door with the broken hydraulic arm that always made a loud clang when it shut. The sound was unmistakable, but it made no sense. Even if someone had gone through that door, there was nowhere for them to go. My heart pounding, I walked to the courtyard door and pushed it open. The motion-activated light flickered on, revealing exactly what I expected: an empty courtyard. 4 walls, a couple of plastic chairs, some cigarette butts in an ashtray, and absolutely nowhere a person could have disappeared to in the few seconds it took me to get there. I checked every possible hiding spot, even though there really weren't any. I looked behind the few storage containers we kept out there, checked if maybe they'd somehow climbed up to the roof, impossible without a ladder which wasn't there, and even looked down the storm drain, which was securely bolted shut. Nobody was there. Nobody could have been there. I went back inside, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close the door. I decided to check the manager's office, thinking maybe they'd somehow slipped past me, though I couldn't imagine how. The office door was locked, just as it should have been. I had the keys since I was on the overnight shift, so I unlocked it and flipped on the lights. Everything was exactly as it had been when I'd started my shift. Computer off, papers neatly stacked, nothing out of place. I spent the next hour searching every inch of the back area. I checked all the storage rooms, the bathrooms, the loading dock, everywhere. I found nothing. By 2 in the morning, I was sitting in the break room trying to calm myself down with a cup of terrible vending machine coffee. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was another employee who'd come in and was playing a prank on me, but that didn't explain how they'd disappeared so completely or why they'd be wearing such bizarre clothes. I thought about calling my manager, but what would I say? Hey, I think I just saw a ghost in 19th century clothes walking around the store. I'd sound insane, so I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, jumping at every sound for the rest of my shift. When morning came and other employees started arriving, I tried to act normal, but I must have looked terrible because my co-worker Jenny took one look at me and asked if I was sick. I mumbled something about not sleeping well and left as soon as my shift was over. I spent the entire day researching the history of the building online. Turns out, before it was a Goodwill, the building had been a department store from 1905 until the early 70s. Before that, it had been some kind of warehouse. I couldn't find any specific stories about deaths or tragedies there, but a building that old in 1850 downtown Seattle, there had to be stories. I almost called in sick for my next overnight shift, but I needed the money too badly. So 2 days later, I was back in the store, alone, trying not to freak out at every noise. Around 1 in the morning, I was organizing the book section when I heard footsteps on the floor above me. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone in hard-soled shoes walking slowly across the wooden floor. I froze, listening as they moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, directly above my head. I knew I should investigate. It was my job to make sure the building was secure, but I couldn't make myself go up those stairs. Instead, I turned the radio up loud and pretended I couldn't hear anything else for the rest of the shift. The next week, things escalated. I was in the employee bathroom when all 3 stall doors slammed shut simultaneously. There was no draft, no open windows, nothing that could explain it. I ran out without washing my hands and didn't go back in there for the rest of the night. Another time, I was sorting through a bin of donated toys when a jack-in-the-box suddenly popped open right next to me. No one had wound it up. It just opened. But the worst was when I started finding old black and white photos mixed in with the donations. They weren't for sale. They'd appear in places I'd just cleaned or organized. Photos of people in old-fashioned clothes standing in front of what looked like our building, but from 100 years ago. In one of them, standing slightly apart from the group, was a man in a dark suit with a high collar and a strange hat. He was looking directly at the camera, but his face was always blurred, like someone had smudged it with their thumb. After 2 months, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit without notice, just left a note saying I wasn't coming back. My manager called me later that day, not angry, but concerned. When I wouldn't give her a straight answer about why I'd quit, she sighed and said, "It was the overnight shift, wasn't it? Nobody ever lasts more than a few months on that shift." That was 10 years ago. I still live in Seattle, but I take the long way around that block. I've never been back in that Goodwill, and I never will. Sometimes I drive past it late at night, and I swear I can see someone standing in the second-floor window looking down at the street. Someone in old-fashioned clothes watching and waiting. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. I just know that whatever or whoever I saw that night, it wasn't from this time, and maybe not even from this world. And sometimes late at night when I'm half asleep, I still hear that courtyard door closing, even though there's nobody there to close it. Story 6, I never thought I'd be posting something like this. I've always been the skeptical one, the person who needs hard evidence before believing in anything. But what happened last month has completely turned my worldview upside down, and I still can't fully process it. My friend Jude and I have known each other since 5th grade. We're talking 20 years of friendship. Back then, she would casually mention seeing ghosts like it was the most normal thing in the world. She'd describe them as shadows sometimes, other times just a presence she could feel, and occasionally full-on apparitions of people. I remember sitting in her bedroom during sleepovers while she'd point to her closet and tell me about Jim, this old man who would hang out in there. She always insisted he wasn't scary or evil, just kind of there, watching. As kids, I played along. I mean, what else do you do when your best friend says there's a ghost in her closet? But truthfully, I always thought she was making it up for attention or had an overactive imagination. We'd have these long conversations about the spirits she could see, and I'd pretend to believe her while secretly thinking she'd grow out of it. We went to different colleges after high school and ended up settling in different states. We stayed in touch, but not like before, just the occasional text or call to catch up. Last month, I flew back to my hometown to help my mom clean out some stuff from our old house. Jude still lives there, so we arranged to meet up. It was so good seeing her again. She looked different, we both did, but that connection was still there. We grabbed dinner at this little Mexican place we used to go to as teenagers, caught up on life, relationships, careers, all that stuff. After dinner, we went back to my mom's house to hang out. Mom was out playing bingo with her friends, so we had the place to ourselves. We were sitting in the living room drinking wine and reminiscing about high school when I decided to bring up her ghost thing as a joke. I hadn't thought about it in years. "So, Jude," I said, laughing, "any ghosts hanging around here tonight?" I expected her to laugh it off or maybe admit it was all made up. Instead, she casually looked around the room and said, "Yeah, actually, there are a few. There's an older Native American woman who hangs out near your mom's bedroom. She's been watching us since we got here." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like she was commenting on the weather, made my skin prickle. I rolled my eyes, but something about her tone made me uncomfortable. "Come on, we're not kids anymore," I said. Jude shrugged. "I know it sounds crazy. Trust me, I wish I couldn't see them sometimes, but they're still there whether you believe in them or not." That's when I decided to test her. My maternal grandmother was Native American from a tribe in Texas. She died when I was 11. I never told Jude much about her because she passed before Jude and I became close friends. "Okay, so tell me about this Native American woman," I challenged. Jude took a sip of wine and looked toward my mom's bedroom. She's short, maybe 5 feet tall, long gray hair in a braid. She's wearing something long, like a nightgown or dress. She keeps looking at you with this huge smile. I think she might be related to you. My throat went dry. That description matched my grandmother perfectly. She always wore her hair in a single braid and was tiny, barely 5 feet tall. But this could still be a coincidence, right? "What else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's showing me a baby blanket or something small, blue. Did she make something for you when you were born?" I felt like someone had dumped ice water over me. My grandmother had knitted a small blue blanket for me before I was born. It was one of the few things I had from her, tucked away in a box in my apartment. Still, I wasn't convinced. What was her husband's name? I asked, thinking there was no way Jude could know this. Without hesitation, Jude said, "She's showing me something that starts with an R. Robert." "No, Richard. My grandfather's name was Richard. He died before I was born." "How long did I know her before she died?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. "She's saying, not long enough. You were young. I'm getting the number 11. Were you 11 when she passed?" I nodded, unable to speak. I was exactly 11 years and 2 months old when my grandmother died. "She's showing me 4 children. Are there 4 in your mom's family? But one of them isn't here anymore." "A brother? Did your mom have a brother who passed?" "My mom was one of 4 siblings, 3 girls and a boy. Her brother died in a car accident in his 20s, long before I was born." By this point, my hands were shaking. There was no way Jude could know these details. We hadn't talked about my extended family much, even as kids. My mom didn't keep many family photos around, and my grandmother had lived in Texas until the last year of her life when she moved closer to us. "There's a picture," Jude continued, her eyes unfocused like she was seeing something I couldn't. "She's pointing to a family photo, 4 adults. The women are all dressed up, but one of them really liked to party. Is that your mom?" I nearly dropped my wine glass. There was an old photo from the 70s of my mom and her siblings at some family gathering. My mom was clearly the party girl of the group, wearing a flashy outfit and heavy makeup, while her sisters were more conservatively dressed. That photo was in an album at my apartment, over 1,000 miles away. Jude had never been to my place, never seen that photo. "Jude, how could you possibly know all this?" I asked, my skepticism crumbling by the second. She just shook her head. "I don't know. I just see things, get impressions. It's like they show me pictures or put thoughts in my head. I can't explain it any better than that." We sat in silence for a minute. I was trying to process everything, searching for logical explanations and coming up empty. "There's someone else here too," Jude said suddenly. "A man. He's younger than the woman. Dark hair. He keeps standing behind you." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "What does he want?" "He's trying to get your attention. He's been trying for a while," he says. This was getting too intense. I tried to lighten the mood by changing the subject, asking about her job. We chatted about normal stuff for about 20 minutes, both of us looking at our phones, showing each other photos and catching up on mutual friends. That's when it happened. I was scrolling through Instagram when I felt this intense cold spot on the right side of my neck, not like a draft or the AC. This was a concentrated coldness, almost like someone was pressing an ice cube against my skin. It was so sudden and specific that I almost reached up to touch it, but I didn't want to seem weird. I didn't say anything or visibly react. Without any prompting, Jude suddenly looked up from her phone and said, "I just got an image in my mind of him touching your neck." She pointed to the exact spot where I felt the cold sensation. "Right here. Did you feel that?" I felt like I couldn't breathe. There's no way she could have known. I hadn't moved, hadn't said anything, hadn't even changed my expression. The cold spot was still there, and she had pointed to the precise location without any clues from me. "Yes," I whispered. "I felt it. It's cold, right there." Jude nodded like this was completely normal. "He wants you to know he's here. He's been trying to reach you for a while." The cold spot lingered for another minute or so, then faded away. I sat there, completely stunned. In that moment, 20 years of skepticism shattered. There was simply no logical explanation for what had just happened. What makes this even more convincing is that Jude has never tried to profit from her abilities. She doesn't do readings, doesn't charge money, doesn't even like to talk about it much. She's actually always seemed burdened by it, like it's something she has to carry rather than a gift. When we were kids, she would sometimes cry because she couldn't sleep with all the people in her room. It's been 4 weeks and I still can't stop thinking about what happened. I've tried to rationalize it away. Maybe she noticed some subtle reaction I wasn't aware of making. Maybe it was all an elaborate prank. Maybe she had researched my family history online. But none of those explanations hold up. The cold spot on my neck and her immediate, accurate identification of it is what I keep coming back to. There was no way for her to know what I was physically feeling in that exact moment, unless she genuinely has some ability to perceive things beyond normal human senses. I've spent my whole life believing that what we can see and touch is all there is. Now I'm not so sure. If Jude can really communicate with the dead, what else might be possible? What else might be out there that we can't perceive? I haven't told anyone else about this. How could I? Most people would think I've lost my mind. But I know what I experienced, and it's forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about reality. I don't know who the man was, the one who touched my neck. Jude couldn't get a clear sense of his identity. Part of me wants to know, but another part is terrified to dig any deeper. For now, I'm just trying to process the fact that the world is apparently much stranger than I ever allowed myself to believe. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Something that completely changed how you see the world? I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something enormous, and I don't know whether to step back or leap forward. Story 7. I don't usually share this. Most people don't believe me anyway, and my family still thinks I had an overactive imagination as a kid. But I know what I saw that night in the summer of '93, and it wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I was 6 years old, and what happened changed me forever. We lived in this old farmhouse in rural Virginia, about 20 miles outside of Charlottesville. It was one of those places with creaky floorboards and windows that rattled when the wind blew hard. My room was at the end of the hallway on the second floor, across from the bathroom. I had this small twin bed with a Power Rangers comforter that I thought would protect me from anything. That night in July was brutally hot. The kind of Virginia summer heat that sticks to your skin and makes it impossible to get comfortable. We didn't have central air back then, just this ancient window unit in the living room that barely cooled anything beyond a 3-foot radius. My mom had put a box fan in my doorway, but it just pushed the hot air around. I remember waking up around 2 in the morning, completely drenched in sweat. My pajamas were clinging to my body, and my feet were literally sticking to the sheets. It was disgusting. I kicked off the covers to get some relief and hung my feet over the edge of the bed to cool them off. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the box fan making a weird noise, or maybe my dad snoring down the hall. But this was different. It was a deep, heavy breathing, slow and deliberate, like when you're trying to catch your breath after running too hard, but deeper, almost like it was coming through something. My entire body went rigid. You know that feeling when you're suddenly so scared that you can't even scream? That's what happened to me. I couldn't move a muscle. The breathing wasn't coming from the hallway or under my bed. It was in my room, between my bed and the window. I remember thinking that if I didn't look, maybe it would go away. Maybe it wasn't real. But the breathing continued, getting slightly louder. I could feel something watching me. Finally, I gathered every ounce of courage in my 6-year-old body and slowly rolled over. What I saw standing there still haunts me to this day. Between my bed and the window stood this massive black figure. The window was behind it, and moonlight was streaming in, but this thing, it was like it was absorbing all the light around it. I've tried to describe it to people over the years, but words don't really capture it. It wasn't just dark or black like clothes or shadows. It was the blackest black I've ever seen, like a hole cut into reality. It was huge, almost touching the ceiling of my room, which had to be at least 8 feet high, and it was wide, wider than my twin bed. I remember thinking it could probably wrap its arms around me twice. Speaking of arms, they hung at its sides, unnaturally long, reaching almost to where its knees would be if it had normal proportions. Its shoulders were broad, almost like it was wearing football pads, but I could tell it was just its natural shape. The worst part was its face, or what should have been a face. I could make out eyes, these slightly lighter spots in all that blackness, but they didn't reflect light like normal eyes would. There was no nose that I could see, and I couldn't tell if it had a mouth. It was like its features were barely there, just suggestions in the darkness. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. Me, a terrified little kid, and this thing that had no business existing in my bedroom. Then I screamed. Not the high-pitched scream you'd expect from a kid, but this weird, strangled sound that barely made it past my throat. Mom! Exclamation mark. I finally managed to yell, pushing myself back against my headboard, trying to get as far away as possible. That's when it moved. It slowly raised its arms toward me, not in a quick or aggressive way, but deliberately, like it was reaching out to grab me. I don't know if it made a sound because all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I bolted. I don't even remember getting out of bed, but suddenly I was running across the hall to the bathroom. I slammed the door shut behind me and scrambled onto the toilet, pulling my knees up to my chest. The worst part? I could still see into my bedroom from where I was sitting because I'd left my door open in my panic. The thing was still there, standing in the exact same spot, its arms now back at its sides. It was just watching, waiting. I started screaming for my mom again, louder this time. I heard her footsteps rushing up the stairs and my dad's voice calling from their bedroom asking what was wrong. When my mom burst into the bathroom, I was rocking back and forth on the toilet seat, pointing at my room and trying to tell her about the thing by the window. I remember her face, confused and worried, as she looked where I was pointing. "There's nothing there, Benji," she said, but I refused to believe her. I knew what I saw. She tried to comfort me, saying it was just a bad dream, but I was hysterical. I kept insisting it was real, that it was still in my room. My mom tried to carry me back to bed, but I fought so hard that she eventually gave up. I was pale and shaking so badly that she later told me she thought I was having some kind of seizure. The last thing I remember from that night is being in her arms on the bathroom floor and suddenly feeling like all the energy had drained out of me. I just collapsed against her. My dad said I passed out from fear. I woke up the next morning in my parents' bed, sandwiched between them. When my mom tried to take me back to my room to get dressed, I completely lost it again. I refused to go back in there. For nearly 3 weeks, I slept on a makeshift bed on my parents' floor. They tried everything, leaving the lights on, checking under the bed and in the closet, having my dad stand guard until I fell asleep. Nothing worked. My parents eventually took me to see a child psychologist who said I was experiencing night terrors, but I knew better. Night terrors are dreams. This thing was real. Eventually, I did move back into my room, but only after my dad rearranged all the furniture so my bed was on the opposite wall, as far from the window as possible. I insisted on a nightlight, and I never, ever slept with my feet uncovered again. For years after that night, I'd wake up at the exact same time, 2 in the morning, in a cold sweat, convinced the thing was back. Sometimes I'd hear that breathing again, just for a few seconds, but never saw it standing there again. My family started calling it my kudos gorilla incident after I tried to describe it using a commercial with a giant black gorilla that used to be on TV. They thought it was funny, a cute story about little Benji's overactive imagination, but I never found it amusing. How could I when I knew exactly what I'd seen? The worst part is that it changed me in ways I'm still dealing with today. I'm 36 years old now, and I still can't sleep with my feet uncovered. Not even in the middle of summer. I'd rather sweat through my sheets than leave my feet exposed. And if I wake up in the middle of the night, especially around 2 a.m., I have to turn on a light immediately, or I start to panic. I've tried to find logical explanations over the years. Maybe it was sleep paralysis, though I was clearly able to move. Maybe it was an actual intruder, but how would they have disappeared when my mom came up? And why would an intruder just stand there? Nothing ever made sense. Once in college, my roommate caught me in the middle of one of my night panics and suggested maybe I'd seen a spirit or entity of some kind. I'd never considered that before. I wasn't raised to believe in that stuff. But the more I thought about it, the more it made a weird kind of sense. That thing wasn't human. It didn't move like something with bones and muscles. It was like pure darkness given form. I've looked into similar experiences since then, and I've found people who've seen similar things. Shadow people, they call them. But most of those accounts describe smaller figures, human-sized at most. What I saw was massive, imposing, and the way it reached for me, like it wanted to take me somewhere. Last year, I finally got the courage to visit my childhood home. My parents sold it when I was in high school, and I hadn't been back since. The new owners were nice enough to let me walk through when I explained I'd grown up there. Everything looked different. New paint, new floors, new fixtures. But when I stood in my old bedroom, I felt cold all over again, despite it being June and plenty warm outside. I asked the owners if they'd experienced anything unusual in the house, trying to sound casual. The woman hesitated, glancing at her husband before saying, "Our daughter won't sleep in this room. Says there's something watching her from the window." I nodded and quickly changed the subject, but inside, I was screaming. After all these years, it's still there, still waiting. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted from me. Maybe it was drawn to me specifically, or maybe it was just attached to that house, that room. All I know is that it was real, I wasn't dreaming, and to this day, I can't shake the feeling that if my mom hadn't come when she did, if I hadn't made it to the bathroom in time, I might not be here to tell this story. So judge me if you want, call me crazy or say I made it all up. My own family still does, but I know what I saw that night, and no amount of therapy or rational explanations will ever convince me it wasn't real. And sometimes when I wake up at 2 in the morning, I still hear that breathing. Story 8. I've never shared this with anyone besides my closest friends, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened in our London flat, and writing it down might help me process it. My husband and I moved into our flat about 1.5 years ago. It was a decent place in London, nothing fancy, but in our price range, which is saying something in this city. The moment I walked in during the viewing, something felt off. I can't explain it exactly. It wasn't anything visible, no weird stains or creepy dolls sitting in corners, but there was a heaviness to the air that made my skin prickle. "This place has bad energy," I told my husband as we were moving our boxes in. He just rolled his eyes. "Not this again, Sophia. It's just an old building. They all feel a bit musty." That's how it always went with us. I'd sense something and he'd dismiss it as my imagination. He's always been the practical one, while I'm more in tune with the spiritual side of things. Not in a crystal healing, tarot reading way. I just pick up on energies that most people miss. The first night in our new place was when everything started. I fell asleep quickly enough, exhausted from moving, but then had the most disturbing dream I've ever experienced. I was in some kind of warehouse, empty except for a blonde woman standing in the center of the room. At first, she looked normal, just staring at me with this blank expression. Then her face began to change. Her eyes sank into their sockets, her skin stretched tight across her cheekbones, and an upside-down pentagram appeared on her forehead, like it was being carved into her skin in real time. Then came the worst part. She started bending backwards, slowly, unnaturally, until the back of her head touched the floor behind her feet. Her body formed this grotesque arch, and somehow she was still looking right at me with those hollow eyes. Then she started moving toward me, still in that impossible backward bend, screaming, "You can't break the devil," over and over. I tried to run, but my legs were so heavy. She kept getting closer, faster than should have been possible in that contorted position. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My husband was already awake beside me, looking pale. "You okay?" I asked, still trying to catch my breath. "Had a nightmare," he mumbled. "People jumping off bridges, lots of them, one after another." That struck me as odd right away. My husband never has nightmares. In the 7 years we'd been together, I'd never once seen him disturbed by a dream. Yet here we were, both shaken on our very first night. When I got up that morning, I felt drained. Not just tired from moving or from the nightmare, but like something had literally sucked the life energy out of me. My limbs felt heavy, and I had this pressure in my chest like someone was sitting on me. "I'm just going to take it easy today," I told my husband. "I feel weird." He nodded absently, already focused on setting up his computer for work, but I noticed dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there before. That feeling never went away. Over the next few weeks, I found myself sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night and still waking up exhausted. I'd drag myself out of bed, make coffee, and then need to sit down because just standing in the kitchen took too much energy. The flat itself seemed to be closing in on me. The walls, which had seemed perfectly normal during our viewing, now felt like they were inching closer every day. The ceiling seemed lower. The air felt thicker. I started getting anxious for no reason, my heart racing while I was just sitting on the sofa watching TV. The only relief came when I left the flat. As soon as I stepped outside, it was like a weight lifted. I could breathe again. My energy would slowly return. But the moment I put my key in the door to come home, that heaviness would settle back onto my shoulders. My husband noticed the change in me. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he suggested after finding me crying on the bathroom floor for no particular reason. "This isn't like you." But I knew it wasn't medical. It was the flat. Something was wrong with it, or in it. Our marriage started suffering too. We'd been solid for years, rarely fighting, always talking things through. Now we were snapping at each other over nothing. Whose turn it was to do the dishes, why the laundry hadn't been folded, little things that had never mattered before. About 3 weeks in, I started seeing things. Not hallucinations exactly, more like impressions at the corner of my vision. A woman by the window, her shoulders shaking like she was crying. A little boy sitting on the floor in the corner of our bedroom, knees pulled up to his chest, looking scared. They never fully materialized, never tried to interact with me. They were just there, and then gone when I tried to look directly at them. There was something else too, a feeling I couldn't shake. The word back kept popping into my head. Back, back, back. Like someone was trying to tell me something happened in the past. Something connected to this place. One evening, about a month after we moved in, I was walking home from the tube station. It was getting dark, that in-between time when the streetlights haven't quite come on yet. I was about a block from our building when suddenly everything shifted. 1 second I was walking down a normal London street, and the next I was standing in what looked like a war zone. The buildings around me were partially collapsed, smoke rising from piles of rubble. I could smell burning and something worse, like meat left too long in the sun. People were running, some bleeding, some carrying children. A woman rushed past me wearing clothes that looked straight out of the 1940s. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. It was like I'd stepped through a portal into the past. Then I heard it, the droning of planes overhead, followed by the distinctive whistle of falling bombs. Everyone around me was screaming, running for cover. "Get to the shelter," someone yelled, grabbing my arm. But their hand passed right through me, and I realized they couldn't actually see me. I was witnessing something that had already happened. As quickly as it came, the vision vanished. I was back on my normal street, cars passing by, a couple walking their dog across the road. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I practically ran the rest of the way home. My husband was working late, so I had the flat to myself. I went straight to my laptop and started researching the history of our building and the surrounding area. What I found made my blood run cold. Our flat complex was built in the 1800s, 1970s, but the land it stood on had been residential buildings before that. Buildings that had been destroyed during the Blitz in World War II. A direct hit had killed over 20 people in and around the original structures. I found an account from a woman who had lived next door. The noise was deafening. I tried to get to the shelter, but it was too late. When I made it to the street, everything was gone. Just bricks and fire and bodies. So many bodies. Children, old Mrs. Parker from number 12, the new couple who'd just moved in, all gone. I had to step over them to escape. Their faces, I'll never forget their faces. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. Everything suddenly made sense. The depression, the anxiety, the presences I'd been feeling. This wasn't evil I was sensing, it was suffering. Echoes of those who had died suddenly and violently, still somehow attached to the place where their lives had ended. That night, I was alone in the flat. My husband called to say he'd be working until midnight at least. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water might help me process everything I'd learned. I was rinsing shampoo from my hair when I felt it. Someone else in the bathroom with me. I opened my eyes, blinking away soap, and saw the outline of a man standing just outside the shower curtain. He was tall, with unusually large hands hanging at his sides. I could see right through him to the towel rack on the wall behind. I should have been terrified, but strangely, I wasn't. There was no malevolence coming from him, just an overwhelming sadness. He wasn't there to harm me. He was lost, confused, maybe not even fully aware of my presence. "I see you," I said softly. "I know what happened here." The figure seemed to shift, becoming slightly more solid. Those large hands moved slightly like he was trying to reach out. "You died here, didn't you? In the bombing." The shower suddenly went ice cold, making me gasp. When I looked again, the figure was gone. That was the moment I decided I needed to do something. These weren't evil spirits trying to harm us. They were souls caught in a moment of trauma, replaying their final terrifying moments over and over. The blonde woman in my dream, the crying woman by the window, the frightened child, the man with large hands. They were all victims of that bombing, still trapped in the echo of that horrific night. The next day, I went to a local metaphysical shop and bought sea salt, white sage, and several white candles. The woman at the counter looked at me knowingly. "Clearing out some energy?" she asked. "Something like that," I replied. "Do you know anything about helping spirits move on?" She studied me for a moment. "They're usually stuck because they have unfinished business, or because they don't realize they've passed. Sometimes they just need acknowledgement, recognition of what happened to them." I nodded. That made sense. When I got home, I waited until my husband left for a meeting, then began the cleansing. I opened all the windows, even though it was freezing outside. I sprinkled salt in the corners of each room, lit the sage, and let the smoke fill every space. As I moved through the flat, I spoke aloud. "I know what happened here. I know you died suddenly and violently. I know you might be confused and scared, but you don't have to stay here. Your lives are honored and remembered. It's okay to move on now." As I finished in the last room, the bathroom where I'd seen the man with large hands, something changed. The air felt lighter somehow. The oppressive feeling that had been weighing me down for weeks lifted slightly. I could breathe more easily. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time since moving in. My husband didn't toss and turn beside me. When morning came, I actually felt rested. Over the next few days, I repeated the cleansing ritual. Each time, the energy in the flat improved. My depression began to lift. My husband and I stopped snapping at each other. The impressions of the woman by the window and the frightened child grew fainter until eventually I stopped seeing them altogether. I never told my husband the full story. He noticed the improvement in our home's atmosphere, as he called it, but attributed it to us finally settling in. That was fine with me. Some experiences are too personal, too profound to fully share with someone who hasn't felt what you've felt. We still live in that flat. Sometimes when it's very quiet, I think I catch a whisper or the faint sound of crying, but it's distant now, like an echo of an echo. Whatever energy was trapped here has mostly moved on. I've learned something from all this. What we often perceive as evil or threatening is sometimes just suffering that needs acknowledgement. Those spirits weren't trying to harm us. They were crying out to be remembered, to have their traumatic deaths recognized. Sometimes what feels like a haunting is really just a request to be seen, to be heard, to be honored. To this day, I still get chills thinking about that vision of the bombed-out street. of all those people running for their lives. I wonder if the man with the large hands was a father trying to save his family. If the crying woman was a mother who lost her child, maybe the same frightened boy I sensed in our bedroom. I'll never know for sure. But I hope, wherever they are now, they've found peace. Story 9. I still have trouble sleeping sometimes, even though it's been 5 years since I moved out of that house. The memories keep coming back, especially when I'm alone at night. I've never shared this with anyone except my wife, and even she thinks I'm exaggerating. But I know what I experienced, and writing it down might help me process it all. I was 26 when I moved from my small hometown to Mumbai for a job in IT. The city was overwhelming at first. The crowds, the noise, the constant rush. I found 2 roommates, Vikram and Aditya, both working professionals like me, and we rented an apartment together. We were all in that phase of life where weekends meant parties, loud music, and friends crashing on our couches. After 3 months, we got evicted because of noise complaints. Finding affordable housing in Mumbai is a nightmare, but Vikram somehow found this 2-bedroom house about 2 kilometers from the main road. It was perfect. Standalone, few neighbors, and the rent was surprisingly reasonable. The landlord, Mr. Sharma, seemed eager to rent it out, barely asking any questions during our meeting. We should have found that suspicious, but we were just relieved to find a place where we could continue our weekend gatherings without bothering anyone. The house itself was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, kitchen, and 1 bathroom. It was old but functional. The walls were painted a dull yellow that had faded over time, and the floors creaked when you walked on them. My bedroom was connected to the bathroom, so anyone using it had to go through my room first. It was inconvenient, but I got used to it. For the first few months, everything was great. We had our parties, invited friends over, and lived our lives. Then Vikram got transferred to Bangalore, and 6 months later, Aditya moved out to live with his girlfriend. I stayed because the rent was cheap and I'd grown comfortable there. Living alone didn't bother me. I'd always been independent. This is where things started getting strange. It was a Saturday night in August, about 2 years ago. I'd hosted a small get-together, just 7 or 8 friends. Nothing crazy, just drinks, music, and conversation. Everyone left around 11, and I cleaned up a bit before going to bed around midnight. I was tipsy, but not drunk. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of my bedroom door opening. Through bleary eyes, I saw someone walk through my room toward the bathroom. I assumed it was one of my friends who'd forgotten something or decided to crash on the couch. I mumbled something and went back to sleep. When I properly woke up around 9, there was nobody in the house. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the other bedroom. Nobody. That's when I realized my bedroom door was still locked from the inside. I clearly remembered locking it before sleeping. It was a habit. How could someone have entered my room with the door locked? I brushed it off as a dream or hallucination from the alcohol. But then it happened again the following weekend, and again. Sometimes I'd wake up to see shadowy figures crossing my room. Other times I'd hear the bathroom door closing or toilet flushing when I was alone in the house. Then the kitchen incident started. I'd wake up to the sounds of vessels clanking like someone was cooking or washing dishes. The first few times I jumped out of bed and rushed to the kitchen expecting to find an intruder, but there was never anyone there. Sometimes things weren't where I'd left them. A cup moved from one shelf to another, the refrigerator door slightly open when I was sure I'd closed it. One night, about 3 months after these incidents began, I felt someone grab my ankle and pull, hard. It wasn't gentle or accidental. It felt like someone was trying to drag me off the bed. I kicked and screamed, turning on the lights immediately, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I started questioning my sanity. Was I drinking too much? Was the stress of work getting to me? I mentioned these experiences casually to a colleague who suggested I install cameras. I did, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in my bedroom, but they never captured anything unusual. The shadowy figures I saw never appeared on camera, and the sounds had no source. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the house was old and settling. Maybe the plumbing was faulty, causing those bathroom noises. Maybe I was sleepwalking or experiencing sleep paralysis. I even went to a doctor who found nothing wrong with me physically, but suggested reducing my alcohol consumption and improving my sleep hygiene. The weirdest part, I never felt scared or threatened in the house during the day. It was only at night, especially after parties, that these things happened. So I convinced myself it was all related to the drinking. But then my friends started experiencing things too. Rahul, who'd been to my house dozens of times, fell down the stairs during a party. He swore someone pushed him, but everyone assumed he was just drunk. A month later, another friend, Priya, was found unconscious in the kitchen with a small pool of blood around her head. She'd apparently slipped and hit her head on the counter, but she insisted something had tripped her. These incidents were alarming but still explainable. What happened to me, though, was different. I was returning home on my motorcycle one evening, completely sober, when I lost control right outside the house. It wasn't raining, there were no obstacles on the road, and I wasn't speeding. The bike just seemed to swerve on its own, throwing me off. I dislocated my elbow and had several cuts and bruises. The doctor said I was lucky it wasn't worse. While recovering from the accident, I couldn't ride my bike, so I stayed home most evenings. I also couldn't drink because of the pain medication. And during those 3 weeks of sobriety and early nights, nothing strange happened in the house. No shadows, no sounds, no unexplained movements. This convinced me that all my paranormal experiences were just alcohol-induced hallucinations. Once I recovered, I decided to cut back on drinking and partying. I focused on work, started exercising, and even began dating someone, though I never invited her to my house. Life seemed to be improving, and the strange occurrences became less frequent, though they didn't stop entirely. Then, about 7 months after my accident, Mr. Sharma called to inform me he was planning to demolish the house in 2 months. He offered to help me find another place, but I was almost relieved. I'd been thinking about moving anyway, and this gave me the push I needed. I found a nice apartment closer to my office and moved out a week before the demolition was scheduled. My life improved dramatically after that. I received a promotion at work, traveled to the US for a project, and even met Anjali, who would later become my wife. A year after moving out, I was at a friend's housewarming party when I met this guy named Deepak, who turned out to be a building contractor. During our conversation, I mentioned the house I used to live in, and he recognized the address immediately. His face went pale. "That house?" he asked. "I worked on renovating it before you moved in. None of my workers wanted to be there after dark." When I asked why, he hesitated before telling me. Apparently, about 15 years ago, a family had lived there, a husband, wife, and their 2 children. The husband had suspected his wife of having an affair and, in a fit of rage, had killed her and the children before taking his own life. The bodies weren't discovered for days. According to Deepak, the house had been empty for years before Mr. Sharma bought it as an investment property. He'd renovated it and started renting it out, but no tenant ever stayed longer than a few months. There were always complaints, strange noises, unexplained accidents, feelings of being watched. Deepak also mentioned that Mr. Sharma's family had been experiencing misfortunes. His daughter had been diagnosed with a serious illness, his son had failed his exams, and his wife had been in a car accident. Apparently, some astrologer had advised him to demolish the house, claiming it was the source of his family's troubles. I sat there stunned. All those nights I'd attributed to alcohol or stress. There might have been something else at play. The shadows crossing my room, the sounds in the kitchen, the bathroom door closing. Were they the lingering presence of that family? Was I sharing my home with ghosts? I don't know what to believe. Part of me still thinks there must be a rational explanation for everything I experienced. But another part wonders if those spirits were trying to communicate, to warn me, or perhaps just acknowledge their presence. Sometimes I dream about that house standing alone 2 kilometers from the main road. In my dreams, I see faces in the windows, watching me. I wake up sweating, grateful for the warmth of my wife beside me and the safety of our home. The house is gone now, demolished and replaced with something new. But the memories remain, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still feel like someone is watching me. Story 10. I never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural before all this started. I was just a regular 24-year-old guy trying to figure out life like everyone else. But since the pandemic began 2 years ago, something has been happening to me that I can't explain, and it's getting worse. I'm writing this because I need to tell someone, and maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. It started with insomnia. At first, I thought it was just stress from everything going on in the world. I'd lie awake for hours, feeling like something wasn't right in my apartment. Then came the sleep paralysis. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, completely frozen, unable to move a muscle, while feeling this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. The first truly terrifying experience happened about 18 months ago. I had finally managed to fall asleep around 2 in the morning when I woke up to the feeling of something holding my arm behind my back. Not like someone was twisting it, more like an invisible force was pinning it down. I couldn't move it no matter how hard I tried. Then came the screaming, right in my ear, so loud it felt like my eardrum would burst. But here's the thing, no one else in the apartment heard anything. My roommate at the time, Alex, was sleeping just across the hall and didn't hear a thing. I convinced myself it was just an extremely vivid nightmare. But then it happened again and again, always between 3 and 4 in the morning. Always the same sensation of being restrained, followed by that horrific screaming. I thought moving might help. My lease was up anyway, so I found a new place across town with 2 new roommates, Kyle and Trevor. For about 2 weeks, everything was normal. I was sleeping better, feeling like maybe whatever had been happening was tied to my old apartment, maybe some kind of carbon monoxide issue or something that had been causing hallucinations. I told myself that was the logical explanation. Then one night, I woke up around 3:15. I remember checking my phone and seeing the time. The room felt freezing cold, even though it was summer and we had no AC running. That's when I saw it for the first time. A shadow, darker than the darkness of my room, moving slowly around the foot of my bed. I froze, watching it circle around until it was on my side. I couldn't make out any features, just this human-shaped darkness that seemed to absorb what little light was coming through my window. I tried to scream, to call for Kyle or Trevor, but nothing came out. My voice was just gone. The shadow figure stopped at the side of my bed, and I felt the mattress sink down like someone was sitting on it. Then the weight shifted, and it felt like something was crawling on top of me. I could feel the pressure on my chest, making it hard to breathe, but there was nothing visible there. The next morning, I was a mess. I told Kyle what happened, and he looked at me like I was crazy. But then Trevor walked in and said, "Dude, I had the weirdest dream last night that something was in our apartment." That's when I knew it wasn't just me. Over the next few months, these encounters became more frequent and more intense. The shadow figures became more defined. Sometimes they would just stand in corners watching me. Other times they'd move around my room, opening drawers or touching my belongings. I started keeping a journal of everything that happened, partly to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind, and partly because I thought if I documented it, maybe I could find a pattern. One night about 6 months ago, I experienced something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I was lying in bed, still awake around 2:30, when I felt something grab my neck, not choking me, but firmly gripping it. Then I felt what I can only describe as lips pressing against mine. Cold, dry lips. I tried to push whatever it was away, but my hands just went through empty air. The sensation lasted for maybe 5 seconds before it was gone. After that, things escalated quickly. The shadows started becoming more visible, not just dark shapes, but wispy, smoky figures that seemed to float through the air. Sometimes they'd hover just a few inches from my face, and I swear I could make out facial features in the darkness, hollow eyes and gaping mouths. The incident with my sister's voice was what really broke me. I was alone in the apartment, my roommates both gone for the weekend. Around midnight, I heard someone yelling, "Stop," from the living room. It sounded exactly like my little sister, Emma. The voice kept repeating it, getting louder and more distorted each time. "Stop, stop, stop!" I called Emma immediately, terrified something had happened to her, but she was fine, sleeping over at a friend's house 80 miles away. My roommates eventually admitted they'd been experiencing things too. Kyle said he'd woken up several times feeling like someone was sitting on his chest. Trevor described hearing whispers coming from my empty room when I was out of town for work. They started spending more time away from the apartment, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. The hauntings, I don't know what else to call them, followed me everywhere. At work, things would fall off shelves when I walked by. My co-workers noticed it too. Janet from accounting actually asked me if I was haunted or something after watching a coffee mug slide off my desk when no one was near it. I laughed it off, but inside I was screaming. But what happened yesterday at my grandparents' house? I'm still shaking thinking about it. They were away on a cruise, and I was house-sitting for them. I've always felt safe in their house. It's been in our family for 40 years, and there's never been anything weird about it. I thought maybe whatever was following me wouldn't follow me there. I was wrong. I fell asleep on the couch watching TV around 11. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke up with the most overwhelming sense of dread I've ever felt. The room was ice cold, and I could see my breath. The TV was still on but muted, casting a blue glow over everything. That's when I felt it, a pulling sensation in my chest, right where my heart is. It wasn't painful at first, more like pressure, but then it intensified until it felt like something was literally trying to pull my heart out through my ribcage. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The pressure built until I passed out. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, something was holding my face. I could feel fingers digging into my cheeks. When I opened my eyes, I saw her for the first time. She was shadowy but distinctly female, with what looked like horns or spikes coming out of her head. Her face was inches from mine, and she seemed to be trying to press herself against me. I could barely whisper no as she sucked the air from my lungs. It felt like she was trying to get inside me somehow. I must have blacked out again because the next thing I remember is waking up on the floor beside the couch. I immediately turned on every light in the house. I was not going back to sleep in the dark. I sat in my grandparents' recliner, lights blazing, until dawn. But around 5:30, even with all the lights on, I saw her again. This time she was more visible, translucent, like a girl wearing a white sheet, but I could make out features. She appeared at the foot of the recliner and then, in a motion that seemed almost playful, bounced onto my stomach. I felt the weight of her, the cold that radiated from her form, and then she just disappeared. But she wasn't gone. I could see the distortion in the air where she had been, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The distortion moved across the room toward the TV, which was turned off by this point. In the reflection of the black screen, I could see the ripples in the air moving, circling, as if whatever it was dancing. I had to be at work by 8, so eventually I tried to get a little more sleep before my shift. I was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline. As I was drifting off, a girl's voice whispered in my ear, clear as day. "Yeah, give it up." I shot up, heart pounding. The voice continued, soft but distinct. "Eric and Isabella the greatest. I don't know anyone named Isabella. I don't know any Erics who are friends with an Isabella." It made no sense. Then, "I love you." And finally, "It's so nice." That's when I gave up on sleep altogether. I showered, got dressed, and left for work an hour early. I'm writing this from my car in the parking lot, afraid to go inside because what if it follows me in there too? What if my co-workers see something this time? I don't know what to do anymore. This has been going on for almost 2 years now, getting progressively worse. I've tried sleeping pills therapy, even had a priest come bless my apartment. Though I'm not religious, nothing helps. It's always there, waiting for me to close my eyes. Sometimes I think I'm losing my mind. Other times, I'm absolutely certain that something has attached itself to me and won't let go. The most terrifying part is that I don't know why me or what it wants. Does it want to hurt me, possess me? Why does it sometimes seem almost intimate? I'm exhausted. I'm scared. And I don't know how much longer I can live like this. If anyone has experienced anything similar or knows what this could be, please help me. I'm desperate for answers. I just want to sleep through the night without feeling like something's watching me, waiting to crawl on top of me or whisper in my ear. Every night I go to bed wondering if this will be the night it finally does whatever it's been building up to all this time, and every morning I wake up, if I've slept at all, wondering if tonight will be worse. Story 11. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family. Even now, typing this out makes my hands shake a little. It happened 6 years ago, but the memory is still so vivid it could have been yesterday. My family has always been big on camping. Every summer since I was 8, we'd pack up our old Suburban and head out to different spots in Northern California. That year we decided on Ponderosa Reservoir. My parents, my younger brother Noah, and I spent the first 2 days hiking, swimming, and doing the usual camping stuff. On our third night there, I decided I wanted to try some night fishing. I'd heard from another camper earlier that day that the trout were biting like crazy after sunset. Noah wanted to come along, even though he wasn't much of a fisherman. He was 14 at the time, and I was 17. We waited until after dinner, grabbed our fishing gear, and headed down this narrow trail that led away from our campsite. It was about a 5-minute walk through the woods to this little inlet I'd spotted earlier. The moon was nearly full that night, so we could see pretty well without our flashlights, which was good because we were trying to be quiet. The spot I'd found was perfect. A small clearing near the water with this weird burned-down cabin nearby. Not much was left of it, just some charred foundation and a crumbling stone chimney. Nature had pretty much reclaimed it with thick bushes and ivy growing all around. I remember setting up our stuff on this flat rock right by the water's edge. Noah was being unusually quiet. When I asked him what was up, he just shrugged and said he felt weird. I figured he was just getting spooked by the darkness and the old cabin ruins. After about 20 minutes of fishing in silence, Noah suddenly whispered, "Do you feel like something's watching us?" I laughed it off. "It's just the woods, man. There's probably raccoons or something checking us out." But he kept looking over his shoulder at the overgrown area behind us. Then he said, "I'm serious. I don't like this spot. Can we go back?" I was annoyed because I'd just gotten everything set up, but Noah seemed genuinely freaked out. His face was pale even in the moonlight, so I agreed to walk him back to camp, figuring I'd return afterward to fish alone. The walk back was tense. Noah kept looking behind us, and I kept teasing him about being scared of the dark. When we got to camp, our parents were already in their tent. Noah practically dove into ours, saying he was tired and wanted to sleep. I grabbed a better flashlight and headed back to my fishing spot. Looking back now, I wish I'd just stayed at camp. When I got back to the water, everything was exactly as I'd left it. My fishing rod was still propped up on the rock, the bait box open. I settled back in and cast my line out into the dark water. The night was so quiet, you could hear the tiniest splash when the lure hit the surface. I'd been fishing for maybe 30 minutes when I first heard it. A rustling in the bushes behind me, where all that thick vegetation was growing around the cabin ruins. At first I thought it was just the wind, but there wasn't any breeze that night. The air was completely still. The rustling came again, more distinct this time. It sounded like something moving through the underbrush, pushing branches aside. My first thought was deer, or maybe a raccoon like I'd told Noah. But something about the way it moved didn't sound right for an animal. It was too deliberate. "Hello?" I called out, not too loud. No answer, just more rustling. Closer now. Is someone there? I tried again, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness but only showed tangled bushes and ivy. Nothing else. The rustling stopped when my light hit that area. I turned back to my fishing, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. A few minutes later, it started again. This time it was definitely moving toward me. "Hey, go away!" I shouted, suddenly angry rather than scared. "You're scaring away the fish." The sound stopped immediately. Complete silence followed, and I remember feeling relieved, thinking whatever it was had gone away. I was wrong. After about 5 minutes of silence, the rustling started again, but now it was coming from a different direction, further to my right. Whatever it was had circled around through the thick bush instead of retreating. This is when I started to get really uneasy. The way it was moving seemed purposeful, like it was trying to find a better position. I stood up, shining my flashlight all around, but saw nothing unusual. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "This isn't funny." No response, just more movement in the vegetation, now coming from yet another direction. It was circling me. Despite my growing fear, I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. I'd come here to fish, and I was going to fish, damn it. So I sat back down, though I kept my flashlight close. Incredibly, I actually caught a fish about 10 minutes later, a decent-sized trout. The excitement of the catch momentarily distracted me from my fear. I was removing the hook from its mouth when the rustling started again, louder and closer than before. I jumped, dropping the fish on the rock. It flopped around wildly as I scrambled to my feet, nearly knocking over my tackle box. The sound was coming from directly behind me now, maybe 15 feet away in the thickest part of the undergrowth. That's when I made a decision that still haunts me. Instead of running back to camp, I moved to the other side of the small clearing, thinking I could get a better look at whatever was stalking me. I pointed my flashlight up the steep hillside that led down to this fishing spot. What I saw there will stay with me forever. Crouched in the bushes, about 20 feet up the slope, was something. At first glance, it looked human-shaped. It was squatting on what seemed like 2 legs. But as I focused the light on it, I realized it wasn't human at all. It had no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a smooth, pale face with 2 large, pointed ears sticking out from the sides of its head. Its neck was too long, too thin to support a human head. In the flashlight beam, its skin looked almost translucent with a sickly grayish tint. For a moment, just a split second, we stared at each other, me looking at its blank face, and it sensing me somehow despite having no eyes. I screamed, not a manly shout or a call for help, but a full-on scream of pure terror. "Leave me alone," I yelled, backing away until I nearly fell into the water. "Mom, Dad, Noah, help!" The thing didn't move. It just stayed there, crouched in that unnatural position, its head tilted slightly as if it were curious about me. I kept screaming for my family, my voice echoing across the water. The creature still didn't move, but I swear I could feel its attention on me, intense and focused despite its lack of eyes. I don't know how long I stood there shouting, but eventually I heard voices calling my name and saw flashlight beams bobbing through the trees as my family came running down the trail. I kept my own light trained on the creature the whole time, afraid to look away even for a second. But the moment my dad's voice got close enough to make out his words, the thing moved. It didn't run away like a normal animal. It sort of folded backward into the brush with a quick fluid motion that no human could make. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, without making a sound. By the time my parents and Noah reached me, I was standing alone by the water, still pointing my flashlight at the now empty hillside. "What happened? Are you okay?" My mom was frantic, grabbing my shoulders, checking me for injuries. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words came out jumbled and panicky. I remember Noah's face as I described the faceless creature. He believed me instantly, his earlier fear validated. My parents were skeptical but concerned enough about my obvious terror that they didn't argue when I insisted we pack up and leave right then, in the middle of the night. We left most of our camping gear behind, throwing only the essentials into the car. I sat in the back seat with Noah, both of us staring out the windows as we drove away from Ponderosa Reservoir. I didn't sleep at all that night, even after we checked into a motel 50 miles away. My parents went back the next day to get our stuff while Noah and I stayed in the motel. They reported nothing unusual at our campsite, though they did mention that our things seemed to have been disturbed somehow. Nothing was missing, just rearranged, as if something had been examining our belongings. It's been 6 years, and I've never gone camping since. Noah refuses to as well. My parents think we overreacted to a bear or mountain lion, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel what I felt, that terrible sense of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. I've researched local folklore since then, trying to find any mention of faceless creatures in the Ponderosa area. I found nothing concrete, though there are vague stories from the indigenous people about watchers in the woods that avoid description. Some logging operation records from the 1950s mention workers refusing to return to certain areas after reporting encounters they wouldn't elaborate on. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know if it meant me harm or was just curious. But I know what I saw, and I know that somewhere in the woods around Ponderosa Reservoir, there's a creature with no face that watches people when they think they're alone. And sometimes when I'm fishing at the lake near my college, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, listening for that distinctive rustling in the bushes behind me. Story 12. I still don't know how to start this. I've been staring at my laptop for 20 minutes, trying to find the right words. My hands are shaking even now, but I need to write this down. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Maybe someone can help us. I'm 15 years old, and for as long as I can remember, there's been something wrong with my family, something dark that follows us. My mother calls it the curse. I used to think it was just superstition, just something adults in Ethiopia talk about when they can't explain things. But I know better now. I've seen it. I've felt it. We live in Addis Ababa. I was born here, but the curse has been with my mother's family for generations. She's told me stories about her childhood, about seeing things that weren't there, demons, spirits, shadows that moved on their own. For years, I thought they were just scary bedtime stories, but then it started happening to me too. The headaches came first, horrible, pounding pain that made it impossible to think. My mother gets them too. Sometimes we both have them on the same day, and we just sit in the dark apartment with all the curtains closed, not speaking. The doctors say it's just migraines, but they don't understand. How could a migraine affect both of us at exactly the same time? How could it feel like something is literally trying to split your skull open from the inside? 3 months ago, the dreams started. I don't even want to write about them, but I need to get this out. In the dreams, I'm lying in my bed, just like in real life. Everything looks exactly the same. The crack in my ceiling, the small wooden cross my grandmother gave me hanging on the wall, the pile of school books on my desk. But there's something else in the room with me. I can't see it at first, but I can feel it watching me. Then it starts to whisper, right against my ear, so close I can feel its breath, cold and damp, like the air from an open grave. It speaks in a language I don't understand, but somehow I know what it's saying. It's asking me to let it in, over and over again. Let me in, Amara, let me in, open your heart, open your mind, let me in. I try to scream, but nothing comes out. I try to move, but my body won't respond. It's like I'm frozen, trapped inside myself while this thing whispers in my ear, and then I feel it touching me. Not with hands. It feels like smoke or fog sliding across my skin, seeping into my pores. That's when I finally wake up, gasping for air, my nightclothes soaked with sweat, my body aching like I've been beaten. Last night was the worst it's ever been. I went to bed around 10, exhausted from studying for exams. I must have fallen asleep quickly because the next thing I knew I was in that familiar paralyzed state. But this time was different. This time I could see it. It was standing at the foot of my bed, a dark shape, blacker than the darkness around it. It had no real form, just a twisting, churning mass of shadows, but I could feel it watching me. It had eyes somewhere in that darkness, cold, ancient eyes that have been watching my family for generations. Your mother couldn't break it, it whispered, not moving toward me yet. Your grandmother couldn't break it. What makes you think you can? I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but my lips wouldn't move. It laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone. We've been with your bloodline for 4 generations now, 4 curses bound together. Do you know what they did? Do you know why we came? I still couldn't move, couldn't speak. The thing began to drift closer, floating across the floor toward the side of my bed. They tried to send us away, it continued. Your mother took you to healers, to churches, to men who claimed they could break our hold. But we're still here, aren't we, Amara? We'll always be here. It was right beside me now, and I could feel the cold radiating from it. The air in my lungs felt like ice. Let me show you, it whispered, and suddenly I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was standing in a small hut I didn't recognize. A woman was kneeling on the dirt floor, mixing something in a wooden bowl. She was crying, tears falling into the mixture. I somehow knew she was my great-grandmother, though I've never seen a picture of her. Behind her, a man lay on a mat, his breathing shallow, his skin gray. He was dying. This is where it began, the voice whispered, though I couldn't see the shadow creature anymore. She cursed your family out of grief. Her husband was dying, and your great-grandfather had taken the medicine that could have saved him. The scene shifted. Now I was in another home, more modern. A woman, my grandmother as a young woman, was arguing with another woman. Their voices were raised, their faces twisted with anger. The second curse, the voice explained. Your grandmother shamed this woman's son, accused him of theft. He hanged himself the next day. His mother visited a witch doctor that night. Another shift, another scene, a market this time. My mother, younger than I've ever seen her, walking away from a stall while an old man shouted after her. The third, your mother thought the old man was cheating her. She humiliated him in front of everyone, called him a liar and a thief. His sister was known for her connections to the spirit world. One last shift, a hospital room, my mother in a bed, holding a baby. Me, a nurse standing nearby, her face twisted with hatred. And the fourth, the nurse who helped deliver you. Your mother had her fired a year earlier. She recognized your mother and remembered. She whispered the curse while she held you before she handed you to your mother. Then I was back in my bedroom, the shadow creature looming over me. 4 curses, bound together, it said, passed down through the blood. And now they're all yours, little Amara. I woke up screaming. My mother rushed into my room, turned on the light. She held me while I sobbed, trying to explain what I'd seen. She didn't look surprised, just tired. So very tired. It's getting stronger, she whispered, stroking my hair. It's always been worse for the daughters. That's when she told me everything, how she'd experienced the same dreams when she was my age, how her mother had too, how the curse had manifested differently for each generation, but had always been there, lurking in the background of their lives. I thought it would skip you, she said, her voice breaking. I prayed it would skip you. That's why I never told you everything before. I thought if you didn't know, maybe it wouldn't find you. But it had found me. It had always been there, waiting. My mother told me about her own experiences, the sleep paralysis that had plagued her since childhood. The visions of demons and ghosts that would appear in the corner of her room, watching her, the sensation of hands touching her in the night when no one was there. She told me about her friend who had traveled all the way to Sudan last year, seeking out spiritual experts who might know how to break the curse. The friend had returned with grim news. The experts had confirmed the fourfold curse but couldn't break it. They said it was too deeply rooted, too powerful. "We've tried everything," my mother said, her eyes hollow. "Priests, shamans, spiritual healers from 3 different countries. Nothing works." She hesitated, then told me something she'd never shared before. When I was just a baby, she had a nightmare, but it wasn't just a dream. She saw a demonic figure crawling over her body to reach me in my crib. It wasn't looking at her. Its attention was fixed entirely on me. It reached out one long, gnarled finger and stroked my cheek. Then it turned to my mother and smiled, as if to say, "She's ours now." When she woke up, there were scratches on my cheek. That's when I remembered something, a memory I'd buried so deep, I'd convinced myself it was just a bad dream. I must have been 4 or 5 years old. I was playing in my mother's bedroom while she folded laundry. I looked up and saw something staring at me from her closet. The door was open just a crack, but I could see its eyes, red and glowing, fixed on me. I started screaming. My mother grabbed me and took me to the bathroom, thinking I'd calm down if I washed my face. But as she held me up to the sink, I saw it again, reflected in the mirror behind us. An impossibly tall, skinny figure, completely black like it was made of smoke or oil. Its limbs were too long, its fingers like twigs, and those eyes, huge and red, burning with hatred. It was reaching for me. I screamed again, and my mother turned around quickly, but there was nothing there, or at least she couldn't see it. I never told her what I saw that day. I convinced myself it wasn't real, but now I know it was. It's always been real. This morning I found something on my pillow, a small pile of dirt, grave dirt, I somehow know, arranged in a perfect circle. My mother saw it too. She didn't say anything, just swept it into her hand and flushed it down the toilet. Then she called the priest again. "He's coming tomorrow, but I don't think he can help us. No one can. This thing, this curse, it's in our blood. How do you cut something out of your own blood?" I don't know what to do. The headache is starting again. I can feel it building behind my eyes. My mother is in her room. I can hear her praying. But I don't think God is listening. Not to us. Tonight, I'm going to try to stay awake. I can't face those dreams again. I can't bear to hear that voice, to feel those cold fingers on my skin. But I'm so tired. My eyes keep closing even as I type this. If anyone has experienced anything like this, please tell me what to do. Tell me how to fight it. Tell me how to break a curse that's been in my family for 4 generations, because I can feel it getting stronger, and I don't know how much longer I can resist letting it in. Story 13. I've been trying to make sense of what happened that night for years now. I'm still stationed at JBLM, Joint Base Lewis McChord, formerly Fort Lewis, finishing up my last year of a 4-year assignment, but I've never felt comfortable here since. I'm not normally the type to believe in supernatural stuff. I've always been pretty grounded. You kind of have to be in the military. But what happened in my barracks room last August completely shattered my understanding of reality. It was one of those sticky August nights in Washington state. People think the Pacific Northwest is all rain and cool weather, but summers here can be brutal, especially in military housing with no AC. The barracks I'm in are these old 3-story buildings, all concrete and cinder block that trap heat like an oven. My room was on the 3rd floor, which made it even worse. That night was particularly bad, hot, and weirdly gloomy, with this strong wind that seemed to come out of nowhere, the kind of wind that makes the trees bend and creates that low, howling sound. I remember feeling on edge even before anything happened. There was something about the atmosphere that felt charged. I had this big box fan propped in my window, the only thing keeping me from completely melting. The windows in these old barracks are metal framed, and the fan always rattled against it. After a few months, that rattling becomes white noise that actually helps you sleep. I'd gotten so used to it that I probably would have had trouble sleeping without it. I was lying in bed, drifting in and out of that weird half-sleep state, when I noticed something different about the sound. The rattling wasn't consistent anymore. It was fading in and out. almost rhythmically. At first I thought the wind was just causing the fan to shift, but something about it felt deliberate. When I opened my eyes and looked toward the window, what I saw made my entire body go cold despite the heat. The fan was hovering, literally hovering, about 2 inches above the window frame. Not tilted, not partially lifted, but perfectly parallel to where it should have been sitting, except it wasn't touching anything. It was just floating there, still running, but completely disconnected from the window. I blinked hard, thinking I must be hallucinating from exhaustion or heat, but when I looked again, it was still floating. The rattling sound came only when the fan would briefly make contact with the window frame before lifting away again, explaining the intermittent noise. My first instinct was to jump up and grab it, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with a fear I'd never experienced before. Not in training, not in any situation I'd been in during my military career. This was different. This was wrong on a fundamental level. I squeezed my eyes shut and turned away, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. "You're tired," I whispered to myself. "You're overheated and exhausted and seeing things." I repeated it like a mantra, trying to make it true. After a minute or so of controlling my breathing, I managed to lie back down, keeping my back to the window. I pulled my thin sheet up despite the heat, feeling like a kid hiding from monsters. I know how ridiculous that sounds coming from a sergeant in the US Army, but in that moment, I was stripped of all my training and confidence. I tried to force myself to sleep, focusing on anything but the fan. I was almost getting there when I felt something tug at my undershirt. It wasn't aggressive, just a gentle pull that untucked it from the left side of my PT shorts. Half asleep, I reached down and tucked it back in, assuming I'd shifted position and caused it to come loose. No sooner had I tucked it in than I felt the right side come untucked. Again, I reached down and fixed it, annoyed but still trying to stay in that drowsy state. Then the back came untucked, then the left side again. This happened in sequence, over and over, as if someone was circling my bed, deliberately pulling at my shirt one side at a time. I sat bolt upright, fully awake now and sweating not just from the heat. That's when I noticed something else. A green light from my desk was flashing. I keep a power strip in my closet for my laptop and other electronics, and it has this small green indicator light. It was turning on and off, at regular intervals. I stared at it, trying to understand what could cause that. Power fluctuations, maybe? But nothing else in the room was affected. My alarm clock was steady. The fan was still running. I didn't dare look to see if it was still hovering. Something compelled me to get up and check the closet. My legs felt like lead as I crossed the small room. When I pulled open the closet door, I saw what was causing the flickering. My desk drawer was sliding open and closed on its own, about an inch each way. The green light from the power strip would disappear behind the drawer when it closed and reappear when it opened. Open, close, open, close, mechanical and precise, like it was being controlled by some invisible hand. I slammed the drawer shut and pushed against it, but as soon as I removed my hand, it started again. Open, close, open, close. The rhythm matched perfectly with the tugging I'd felt on my shirt. Left, right, back, left, drawer open, drawer closed. I backed away, bumping into my bed and nearly falling. The room felt different now, charged with something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. The air was thick, almost difficult to breathe, and despite the heat, I felt cold patches moving around me, like walking through random pockets of winter air in the middle of summer. I considered running, just grabbing my key and getting the hell out of there. But where would I go? Who would I tell? What would I say? "Hey, my fan is levitating and my drawer is possessed." I'd sound crazy. And in the military, appearing mentally unstable is a quick way to end your career. So I did the only thing I could think of. I sat on my bed, turned on all the lights, and waited. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The drawer eventually stopped its movement around 4 in the morning. The fan settled back onto the windowsill about an hour later. By the time the sun came up, everything looked normal. If it weren't for my bloodshot eyes and the complete exhaustion I felt, I might have convinced myself it was all a vivid nightmare. I didn't tell anyone at first. I went about my duties like everything was fine, but I was jumpy, distracted. I started sleeping with the lights on, the fan unplugged, and the drawer secured with duct tape. I'd lie awake listening to every creak and groan of the old building, wondering if it was going to start again. About 2 weeks later, I finally broke down and mentioned something to Staff Sergeant Miller, one of the senior NCOs I trusted. I was vague at first, just asking if he'd ever heard of anything strange happening in the barracks. The look he gave me made my stomach drop. He didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, he lowered his voice and asked, "Building 23? When I nodded, he sighed. "You're not the first," he said. "That place has a history." He told me something that made everything even more disturbing. Apparently, a few years back, some pastor at a church event had superimposed a pentagram over a map of the United States during a presentation about spiritual warfare or something. One of the points of that pentagram landed directly on Fort Lewis. "Probably coincidence," Miller said, not sounding convinced. Then he added something that chilled me even more. "Did you know Fort Lewis had the highest suicide rate in the entire military for several years running?" I didn't know that. I still don't know if what he told me was accurate or just barracks rumors. But after my experience, I was willing to believe almost anything. I requested a room change the next day, citing plumbing issues in my current room. They moved me to the second floor of a different building. Things have been quiet since then, but I still can't shake the feeling that something was in that room with me, something that doesn't belong in our world. I've heard other stories since then. A guy in communications who swears he heard voices coming through unplugged equipment. A woman in logistics who found all her furniture rearranged every morning for a week, despite locking her door from the inside. A mechanic who saw a figure in old-style army fatigues walk through a closed door at the motor pool. Maybe there's something about this place, the land itself or the history or something we've done here. Maybe it's the weight of all the stress and trauma that concentrates in military installations. Or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, though I don't believe that anymore. All I know is that I'm counting down the days until my assignment here ends. I've put in for a transfer to literally anywhere else, and until then, I sleep with the lights on, no fan, and nothing that can move on its own. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told me this story. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and whatever was in that room that night, it wasn't from this world, and I pray to God I never encounter it again. Story 14. I still get chills thinking about what happened that summer day when I was 13. It's been 11 years, but the memory is as clear as if it happened yesterday. I've told this story to a few people over the years, those lazy summer afternoons where time seems to stretch endlessly. My parents were at work, and I was home alone with my dog, Baxter. He was a goofy golden retriever who followed me everywhere. I remember I was sprawled on my bed, my laptop propped on a pillow, FaceTiming with my best friend Jordan. Jordan and I had been inseparable since 3rd grade. That day, she was cleaning her room and had her iPad propped up on her vanity. The camera showed her desk chair positioned against a blank wall. She was in her closet, sorting through clothes she'd outgrown, occasionally popping into frame to show me something before tossing it into what I assumed was a donation pile. "My mom's making me get rid of anything I haven't worn in the past year," she complained, her voice slightly muffled from inside the closet. "It's so stupid. What if I want to wear this next month?" I wasn't really paying attention. I was more focused on trying to teach Baxter a new trick, occasionally glancing at the screen while tossing treats to him. "Yeah, that sucks," I said absently, watching him roll over for the 100th time. That's when I first noticed it. Jordan's chair had moved, just slightly, maybe an inch or two away from where it had been before. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Jordan was still chattering away in the closet, the sounds of hangers scraping across the rod punctuating her complaints. "Hey, did you move your chair?" I asked, squinting at the screen. "What? No, I'm in the closet," she called back, not even looking out. I shrugged it off. Maybe the chair had been there the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed its exact position. I went back to playing with Baxter, but something made me keep glancing at the screen. A few minutes later, I looked up again. The chair had definitely moved. It was now at least a foot away from the vanity, positioned awkwardly in the middle of the floor. A cold feeling washed over me. "Jordan," I said, my voice coming out higher than normal, "your chair is moving." "Very funny, Sophia," she replied, clearly not believing me. "I'm serious. It's not where it was before." Jordan poked her head out of the closet, looking annoyed. "What are you talking about?" She turned to look at the chair, and I saw her expression change. "That's weird. I didn't put it there." She walked over to the chair, looking confused. "Maybe I bumped it when I was walking by. I don't remember moving it." "You've been in the closet this whole time," I pointed out. "I've been watching. The chair just moved on its own." Jordan laughed nervously. "Stop it. You're freaking me out." She pushed the chair back to the vanity and went back to the closet. I could tell she was trying to brush it off, but there was tension in her voice now. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, barely blinking, my heart beating faster. About 5 minutes passed. Jordan was still in the closet and I could hear her moving things around, but my attention was locked on that chair. Then it happened again. The chair slid several feet back from the vanity, this time moving faster, more deliberately. "Jordan," I nearly shouted. "The chair just moved again." She came out of the closet looking irritated at first, but when she saw the chair in the middle of the room, her face paled. "What the hell?" We both stared at the chair through the screen. Jordan was standing frozen near her closet door, and I was gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles were white. The room felt charged with something I couldn't explain, and then, as we both watched, the chair violently flew backward, slamming into the wall with such force that it made a loud bang. Jordan screamed. I screamed. Baxter started barking frantically, jumping up on the bed next to me. My whole body went cold like I'd been plunged into ice water. "What the fuck was that?" Jordan's voice was shaking. She hadn't moved from her spot by the closet. "I don't know," I whispered, unable to take my eyes off the screen. The chair was now resting against the wall, looking completely innocent, as if it hadn't just moved on its own. There was a long, tense silence. I could hear Jordan breathing heavily. "Maybe it's the air conditioning," she finally suggested, but her voice made it clear she didn't believe that. "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, even though we both knew that was impossible. How would air conditioning fling a chair across a room with that much force? Jordan took a deep breath. "I'm just going to ignore it. I need to finish cleaning before my mom gets home." She walked cautiously over to the chair, picked it up, and placed it back by the vanity. Her hands were visibly shaking. She kept glancing around the room like she expected to see something else move. "Actually," she said, her voice still unsteady, "I need to grab some trash bags from downstairs. I'll be right back." I watched as she hurried out of the room, leaving me staring at the empty frame, just the chair, the vanity, and the blank wall. I held my breath, waiting to see if the chair would move again. Baxter had settled down but was still alert, his eyes fixed on my face as if sensing my fear. What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. As I stared at the screen, something appeared from the top of the frame. At first, I thought it was Jordan's hand reaching down for something, but then I realized it was a rope, a thick brownish rope, like the kind you'd use to tie a boat to a dock. It slowly lowered from the ceiling, the end of it fashioned into what looked unmistakably like a noose. The rope swung gently in front of the camera as if someone was holding it just out of frame. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. The noose hung there for maybe 3 seconds, swaying slightly before it was quickly pulled back up out of frame. I immediately ended the call, my finger jabbing at the screen in panic. I threw my phone across the bed like it was on fire. Baxter started barking again, jumping off the bed and running to my bedroom door, his hackles raised. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Jordan's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After 4 rings, I finally worked up the courage to answer. "Why did you hang up?" Jordan asked, sounding annoyed and a little scared. Did you just hang a rope in front of the camera?" My voice was barely audible. What? No, I just got back upstairs. What are you talking about? A rope, like a noose. It came down from the ceiling right in front of your iPad. There was a pause. Sophia, that's not funny. I'm not joking. I was almost shouting now. I swear to God, Jordan, a rope with a noose at the end just dangled in front of your camera. There's no rope in my room, she said firmly, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. I don't even own any rope. Well, I saw it, I insisted, tears starting to form in my eyes. I'm not making this up. Jordan was quiet for a moment. Look, I believe that you think you saw something, but there's nothing here. Maybe it was a glitch or something with the video. I wanted to believe that. I desperately wanted there to be a logical explanation. But I knew what I had seen, and it wasn't a glitch. It was too real, too deliberate. I'm coming over, Jordan suddenly said. My mom will be home in like 20 minutes. She can drop me off at your place. No, I practically yelled. The thought of Jordan leaving her house after what I'd seen terrified me. What if whatever was in her room followed her? What if it came for me too? No, don't come over. Just stay on the phone with me, okay? We stayed on FaceTime for another hour, both of us jumpy and on edge. Jordan kept her iPad with her the whole time, even when she went downstairs to wait for her mom. Nothing else happened, but the damage was done. I couldn't shake the image of that rope from my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept my light on and made my dad check under my bed and in my closet, something I hadn't asked him to do since I was 8. I didn't tell my parents what happened. I knew they wouldn't believe me. The next day, Jordan came over and we talked about it for hours. She didn't see the rope, but she had seen the chair move. She couldn't explain it either. We even looked up her house online to see if anyone had died there, but we couldn't find anything. For weeks afterward, Jordan refused to be alone in her room. She said she felt like someone was watching her. Eventually, her family moved to a different house about 6 months later, though for unrelated reasons. 11 years have passed, and Jordan and I still talk about what happened that day. She admits now that she believes me about the rope, even though she didn't see it herself. She says the genuine terror in my reaction was too real to be faked. I've had a few other weird experiences since then, objects moving, strange noises in empty rooms, but nothing has ever come close to the terror I felt watching that noose drop down in front of the camera. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding or that my 13-year-old imagination ran wild, but deep down, I know what I saw. The worst part is not knowing why. Why that day? Why us? Was it trying to scare us? Or was it trying to communicate something? And if it was the latter, what message comes with a noose? I don't have any answers. All I know is that ever since that summer day, I've been acutely aware that there are things in this world we can't explain. Things that exist just beyond what we can see. And sometimes, just sometimes, they find ways to make themselves known. I still hate FaceTime to this day. I'll use it if I have to, but I never prop my phone up and leave it unattended. And I always keep an eye on what's happening in the background. Story 15. I've never really shared this story with anyone outside my family. It happened when I was 13, back in 1995, and to this day, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I know how it sounds. Trust me, I do. If someone told me this story, I'd probably roll my eyes too. But I swear on everything I care about that what I'm about to tell you happened exactly as I remember it. It was May 12th, 1995, my little sister Lily's birthday. She was turning 9, and my mom had gone all out with the party. We had just moved to Commerce City, Colorado about 6 months before, so my parents were extra keen on making sure Lily made friends. Our backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers, and there was this ridiculous Barbie cake my mom had stayed up until 2 in the morning perfecting. The party itself was pretty standard kid stuff, a bunch of 9-year-olds running around hopped up on sugar, playing tag and fighting over who got which party favor. My mom had invited some of the neighborhood kids my age too, so I wouldn't feel left out. Jason and Mike from down the street came, plus Amber, who lived across from us. I wasn't super close with any of them yet, but they were cool enough. After the cake and presents, when things were winding down and some parents had already picked up their kids, we were all just hanging out in the living room. It was getting dark outside, and the weather had turned kind of stormy. One of those sudden Colorado spring storms with thunder rumbling in the distance. I don't even remember who suggested it first. I think it might have been Amber. She was always into that spooky stuff, the kind of girl who'd make you watch Are You Afraid of the Dark? Reruns and then laugh when you jumped. Anyway, someone brought up the idea of doing a séance, and suddenly everyone was super into it. None of us had an actual Ouija board, so we improvised. My mom found an old piece of poster board in the basement, and I grabbed a notebook and tore out pages. We wrote out the alphabet in big letters, added yes and no in the corners, and arranged everything in a rough circle. For the planchette, we used this old shot glass my dad had from some bar in Texas. It was small and heavy, with a flat bottom that slid really smoothly across the paper. There were 7 of us gathered around the coffee table in the living room. Me, Lily, my mom, Amber, Jason, Mike, and Lily's friend Sarah, who was staying for a sleepover. My dad was in the garage working on his car, completely uninterested in our ghost nonsense, as he called it. My mom had read somewhere that you needed a medium for these things, so she volunteered. We turned off most of the lights, leaving just a few candles burning on the mantel and coffee table. The storm outside had picked up, and occasional flashes of lightning lit up the windows, which honestly just added to the whole creepy vibe. We all put our fingers lightly on the shot glass, and my mom started talking in this weird, solemn voice that made me want to laugh, but I held it in because everyone else looked dead serious. "We invite any spirits who wish to communicate with us to join our circle," she said. "We mean no harm and ask that you respect our space as we respect yours." For a few minutes, nothing happened. We just sat there with our fingertips on this shot glass, and I was starting to think this was stupid when suddenly the glass started to move. Just a slight sliding at first, but then more deliberate. "Is someone pushing it?" Jason whispered, and we all shook our heads. The glass slid to the letter E, then L, then V, and kept going until it spelled out Elvis. Amber snorted. "Elvis Presley? Yeah, right." The glass immediately shot to YES. "Prove it," Mike challenged. "What's your middle name?" The glass moved again. ARON. My mom looked confused. "That's not right." Elvis's middle name was Aaron with 2 A's. The glass violently moved to no, and then quickly spelled out 1A. We all looked at each other. Later, I actually looked this up at the library, and it turns out Elvis's middle name was originally spelled with 1A on his birth certificate, but he later used 2. None of us knew that at the time. Mike wasn't convinced. What was the address of Graceland? The glass didn't move for a moment, then spelled out, "Don't remember numbers." "Convenient," Amber muttered. The glass shot across the board so fast it nearly flew off the edge, spelling goodbye before anyone could react. We all sat back, a little freaked out. After a minute, my mom suggested we try again. This time, I asked the first question. "Is there anyone else who wants to talk to us?" The glass slowly started moving again, more gently this time. It spelled out BRIANLONG. "Who are you, Brian?" my mom asked. "Student," the glass spelled, then Adams City High. That sent a chill down my spine. Adams City High was the school I would have gone to if we hadn't moved to a different district just before I started. It was only about 3 miles from our house. "Did you die?" Lily asked bluntly, and my mom shot her a look. "Yes." "How?" Mike asked. "Water, drowned, vacation." "Where?" I asked. "West Beach." We asked more questions, and Brian told us he was 17 when he died, that he had a younger sister too, and that he liked our house. Unlike the Elvis spirit, Brian seemed, I don't know, genuine. The glass moved smoother, the answers were straightforward, and there was none of that defensive attitude we got before. After about 20 minutes of this, something strange happened. The glass suddenly stopped mid-sentence and then spelled out, "Lily birthday?" "Yes," my mom said, looking surprised. "It's Lily's birthday today. She's 9. The glass circled around "yes" twice, then spelled, "Watch candle." We all turned to look at the largest candle on the coffee table. It was one of those thick pillar candles, dark red and about half burned down. As we watched, the flame started to dim. Not flicker like from a draft, but actually get smaller, like someone was turning down a gas burner. It shrank until it was barely a blue speck, hovering just above the wick. The room had gone completely silent. I could hear everyone breathing. The tiny flame held for maybe 5 seconds, and then suddenly, whoosh! It flared back up, higher and brighter than before, casting dancing shadows across all our shocked faces. When we looked back at the board, the glass was already moving. "Happy birthday." Lily squealed in delight, but I felt the hairs on my arms standing up. I looked at my mom, wondering if somehow she'd done it, but she was sitting at least 4 feet away from the candle with both hands visible on the shot glass. There's no way she could have affected that flame. No one could have. We were all accounted for, all hands visible, all focused on the board. After that, the seance took on a different feeling. It wasn't scary anymore. It was amazing. Brian answered more of our questions, told us he was happy where he was, and that he just liked to check in on people sometimes. When we asked why he chose us, the glass spelled out Ethan Energy, which was weird because I hadn't told him my name. Eventually, the younger kids started getting tired, and my mom called an end to the session. We properly said goodbye to Brian. My mom was insistent on this. Never just stop without saying goodbye, she warned. The glass spelled out, "See you soon," before we put everything away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brian, about the candle, about everything that had happened. It felt like I'd glimpsed something most people never get to see. Proof that there's something after death, that we don't just disappear. Over the next few weeks, we did more sessions. Not everyone was always there. Sometimes it was just me, my mom, and Lily. Sometimes Amber would join, but each time, Brian would come through. He became almost like a friend. He'd tell us about his life, about what it was like over there, though he was always vague about details. He had a sense of humor too, sometimes spelling out jokes or making the glass do little dance movements that made Lily giggle. But gradually, everyone else lost interest. My mom got busy with work. Lily found new friends and activities. Amber moved away that summer. Soon, it was just me, still fascinated, still wanting to talk to Brian. One night in late August, I decided to try contacting Brian by myself. I set up the makeshift board on my bedroom floor, lit a candle, hoping for another flame trick, and put my fingers on the shot glass. "Brian, are you there?" I asked. The glass stayed still for so long I thought maybe it wouldn't work with just one person. Then, slowly, it began to move. Not Brian. My heart sank. "Where's Brian?" Moved on. "What do you mean? Where did he go? Heaven. Is he coming back?" "No. Happy now." I sat there in my dark bedroom, a lump forming in my throat. I'd never expected to feel sad about losing contact with a ghost, but there I was, genuinely upset that Brian was gone. "Did he say goodbye?" I asked. "Said thank you, Ethan friend." I don't know why, but I believed it completely. The way the candle flame dipped low when the glass spelled thank you, just like that first night, but gentler, felt like confirmation. I properly ended the session and packed away our homemade board for the last time. I never tried to contact spirits again after that night. It didn't feel right somehow, like trying to call someone who's changed their number and moved away. I've thought about Brian many times over the years. I've wondered if he was really the spirit of a drowned teenager or something else entirely. I've wondered if I could find records of a Brian Long who died that way, but I've never looked. Part of me doesn't want to know, doesn't want to risk discovering there never was a Brian Long from Adams City High. What I do know is this: something genuine happened in our living room that night, something I can't explain, something that changed how I think about life and death. And sometimes when I see a candle flame dip low for no reason, I smile and think maybe Brian is just saying hello. Story 16. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. It was back in 2017 when Elena and I had just moved in together. We weren't married yet, just dating and figuring life out as young adults do. Our place wasn't anything special, just a small rental that used to belong to Elena's aunt. It was affordable and in a decent neighborhood, so we jumped at the opportunity. That particular night started like any other. It was a Friday evening in March, I remember, because we'd both been looking forward to the weekend after a stressful work week. Elena had picked up some Chinese takeout on her way home, and we were just chilling in the living room. Our two dogs, Bella and Max, were lounging at our feet like they always did. Bella's this lazy golden retriever mix who never wants to move unless food is involved, and Max is a hyperactive terrier who usually can't sit still for more than 2 minutes. We had the TV on, some reality show Elena liked, and I was unwinding with a bit of weed. Nothing crazy, just a small joint to take the edge off after a long week. Elena doesn't smoke, never has, so she was completely sober, just relaxing with her food and getting into whatever drama was unfolding on the screen. The living room connected to a hallway that led to the bathroom and 2 bedrooms, our main one and a small spare room we used for storage and guests. From where I was sitting on the couch, I could see straight down that hallway. The bathroom door was across from the spare room. Both doors were closed. I was about halfway through my joint when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just the smoke messing with my eyes, or maybe shadows from the TV. But when I turned to look directly down the hallway, I saw it clear as day. There was this figure. Not a person, not exactly. More like a shadow, but solid somehow. It was about 5 feet tall with these unnaturally broad shoulders. The shape was humanoid, but there were no features, no face, no clothes, just this deep black silhouette, and it was moving. It didn't walk like a normal person. It sort of glided. That's the only way I can describe it. This thing literally came through the closed bathroom door, drifted across the hallway, and then passed straight through the closed door of the spare bedroom. No sound, no door opening, nothing. Just passing through solid objects like they weren't there. My first thought was, holy shit, this weed must be laced with something. I actually started laughing nervously, looking at my joint like it had betrayed me. I'd bought from my usual guy, someone I trusted, but in that moment I was convinced he'd sold me something way stronger than what I'd asked for. I didn't say anything to Elena right away. I was trying to process what I'd just seen and figure out if I was hallucinating. I remember feeling suddenly very aware of my heartbeat, which had picked up speed. My mouth went dry, and there was this cold feeling spreading through my chest. That's when Elena turned to me and asked, "Why are you laughing?" I hesitated before answering. I didn't want to sound crazy. I thought I saw something, I said vaguely. What happened next is something I'll never forget as long as I live. Without any prompting from me, Elena immediately asked, "Did it come out of the bathroom?" I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My skin went cold all over. The joint nearly fell from my fingers. "You saw it too?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded, her face pale. "A black shadow? It went into the spare room?" We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. I hadn't described what I saw. I hadn't pointed. I hadn't directed her attention to the hallway. She had seen exactly the same thing I had, independently, while completely sober. Then I realized something else. Both our dogs were no longer at our feet. They had jumped up onto the couch and were pressed against us, trembling. Bella, who weighs almost 70 pounds and never gets on furniture, was practically in Elena's lap, whimpering softly. Max had wedged himself behind my back, between me and the couch cushions, something he only does during thunderstorms when he's terrified. "The dog saw it too," Elena whispered, stroking Bella's head to calm her. Whatever rational explanation I'd been trying to form in my mind completely fell apart in that moment. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't the weed. This was something else entirely, something that three separate beings had witnessed simultaneously. We sat there frozen for several minutes, neither of us wanting to get up, both of us staring at that hallway. The TV continued playing in the background, but the sound seemed distant now, unimportant. "We should check the spare room," I finally said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Are you crazy?" Elena hissed. "What if it's still in there?" "What if it is?" I countered. "Don't we need to know what we're dealing with?" In reality, I was terrified. My legs felt like jelly as I stood up. The joint was long forgotten on the ashtray, burned down to nothing. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight function, more for comfort than actual need, since the lights were already on in the house. Elena reluctantly got up too, refusing to be left alone in the living room. Bella and Max stayed on the couch, watching us with anxious eyes, but unwilling to follow. We moved slowly down the hallway, my arm protectively in front of Elena. The air felt different somehow, heavier, colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. When we reached the spare room door, I hesitated with my hand on the knob. "Maybe we should just leave it closed," Elena suggested, her voice shaking. But curiosity and a need to rationalize what we'd seen pushed me forward. I turned the knob and swung the door open, flashlight raised like it was some kind of weapon. The spare room looked exactly as it always did. A small bed against one wall, boxes of Elena's seasonal decorations stacked in a corner, an old desk we'd been meaning to refinish. Nothing out of place, no sign of disturbance, no shadow figure. I stepped into the room, sweeping the flashlight across every corner, half expecting something to jump out at us. Elena stayed in the doorway, unwilling to enter but watching intently. The window's locked, I noted, checking the only window in the room. It was a small window with an old-fashioned latch, clearly untouched. Dust had settled on the sill in a way that would have been disturbed if anyone had opened it recently. I checked the closet next, pulling the door open quickly, empty except for some old coats and more storage boxes. I even got down on my hands and knees to look under the bed. Nothing. Could it have been a shadow from the ceiling fan? Elena suggested, clearly trying to find some rational explanation. I looked up at the ceiling. There was no fan in this room, just a simple light fixture, and even if there had been, it couldn't explain a shadow that moved on its own and passed through closed doors. We checked the bathroom next with the same results. Nothing unusual, nothing disturbed. All windows locked, no sign of entry or exit. When we returned to the living room, the dogs were still on the couch, still looking anxious. They seemed relieved to see us, but neither made any move to return to their usual spots on the floor. "What was that?" Elena asked, sitting down heavily on the couch. "Marcus, what did we just see?" I shook my head, mind racing. "I don't know. I really don't know." We spent the rest of that night talking, theorizing, trying to make sense of what had happened. We considered every rational explanation we could think of. Maybe it was a weird shadow from a passing car's headlights. But the bathroom had no external windows. A power surge causing the lights to flicker in a strange way. But we'd both seen a distinct figure with a specific shape and movement pattern. Someone breaking in? But nothing was disturbed, and all doors and windows were locked from the inside. The fact that we'd both seen exactly the same thing, described it the same way, without any prior communication about it, made it impossible to dismiss, and the dog's reaction sealed it for me. Animals don't respond to hallucinations or optical illusions. They had seen something real that frightened them. We barely slept that night. We left all the lights on and stayed close together, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. The dogs refused to leave the couch, breaking their usual nighttime routine of sleeping in their beds on the floor. The next morning, in the harsh light of day, it was easier to doubt what we'd experienced, but neither of us could shake it completely. We spent the weekend rearranging furniture, sage burning the house, Elena's idea. and even reached out to Elena's aunt who had lived there before us. Her aunt just laughed it off, suggesting that my recreational activities had sparked some kind of shared delusion. She swore she'd never experienced anything strange in all the years she'd lived there, but something in her quick dismissal felt off to me, like she was a little too eager to shut down the conversation. In the following weeks, we were constantly on edge, always watching that hallway from the corner of our eyes, but the shadow figure never returned. Eventually, life went back to normal, though we both developed a habit of avoiding that hallway after dark when possible. It's been 7.5 years now. We got married, moved to a different house, and have never experienced anything like that again. But sometimes, when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I find myself staring down hallways, half expecting to see that shadow glide through a door. I've done a lot of research since then on shadow people, spirits, and unexplained phenomena. Some theories suggest they're interdimensional beings, others that they're manifestations of negative energy. Some even believe they're time travelers or aliens observing us. I don't know what it was that Elena and I saw that night. I just know that it was real. Something was in our house, something that didn't belong to our normal reality. The dogs saw it. We both saw it. And to this day, I can't explain what it was or why it was there. The experience changed me. I'm more open to the unexplainable now, more willing to accept that there are things in this world, or perhaps outside of it, that we don't understand and can't rationalize. That shadow, whatever it was, moved through our physical world with an ease that suggests there's more to reality than what we typically perceive. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, in that house, passing through rooms while the new tenants remain oblivious, or maybe it was just passing through, a visitor from somewhere else who briefly crossed into our world before continuing on its journey to wherever such things go. I only know that for those few seconds, when that shadow glided across our hallway, the boundary between what I believed was possible and impossible was forever changed. Story 17. I've never told this story to many people. Most wouldn't believe me anyway, and those who might would probably think I need therapy. Maybe I do, but what happened in that apartment when I was 9 years old was real, and it's followed me for over a decade now. We moved into those apartments in Winnipeg back in 2006. They were brand new government housing units, and my mom was so excited to finally have a decent place for us. My sister Caitlin was 14 at the time, and we'd been sharing a tiny bedroom in our old place, so having my own room felt like winning the lottery. The apartments were built right next to this old brick building that I later learned was a former residential school. You know, one of those places where they took Indigenous kids from their families to assimilate them. I didn't know anything about that history when we moved in. I was just a kid excited about a new place with a playground nearby. The very first night, something weird happened. My mom, Caitlin, and I were all laying on my mom's bed, just talking about how nice the apartment was and making plans for decorating. It was getting late, probably around 11 o'clock when we heard it. Children laughing. Not just one or two, but what sounded like several kids giggling and playing. Then came the distinct sound of marbles rolling across the floor above us, followed by little footsteps running back and forth. My mom froze mid-sentence. "Who the hell is up there at this hour with kids?" she whispered. That's when Caitlin pointed out the obvious thing we'd all somehow forgotten. We were on the top floor. There was nothing above us except the roof. My mom tried to laugh it off. "Must be the building settling or something," she said, but her voice was shaky. She didn't believe that any more than we did. We went to bed that night with all the lights on. I wish I could say that was the only strange thing that happened, but it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. The sounds above us continued almost every night. Children laughing, running, playing. Sometimes they'd wake me up at 3 in the morning, always 3 a.m., like clockwork. The apartment started to feel wrong. Cold spots would appear randomly, even in the middle of summer. The air would get so cold in certain spots that you could see your breath. Doors would slam shut when there wasn't any draft. The TV in the living room would turn on by itself, always to static. But the worst part was what it did to my family. Caitlin, who had always been moody but generally nice to me, became increasingly hostile. She'd fly into these terrifying rages over nothing, me borrowing her hairbrush or using the bathroom too long. One time she threw a glass at me because I changed the channel while she was in the kitchen. It shattered against the wall inches from my head. My mom started drinking more. She'd always had a few beers on weekends, but now she was drinking every night, just sitting in the dark living room staring at nothing. When I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd say she was just tired from work, but her eyes looked empty. I spent more and more time in my bedroom. It was at the end of this weird L-shaped corridor, separated from the rest of the apartment. Mom had picked it for me because it was the biggest kids' room, but now it felt like I was isolated, cut off from everyone else. The room had this antique wooden desk my mom had bought from a second-hand shop downtown. It was too big for the space, really, but I liked having a grown-up desk. My room became the center of the activity. Every single night at exactly 3 a.m., my TV would turn on by itself. The static would wake me up, and I'd find my closet door standing open. I always closed it before bed because it creeped me out, but without fail, it would be open by 3. There was a hockey stick I kept propped in the corner of my room. My dad had given it to me before he left, and even though I didn't play hockey, I kept it. Every morning that stick would be moved to a different spot in my room, but the worst thing, the thing that still gives me nightmares, was what lived in my closet. I called it the Shadow Man. The first time I saw it, I'd woken up to the TV static as usual. The closet door was open, and something made me look inside. There, hunched in the corner where the ceiling met the wall, was this figure. It was impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, and completely black, darker than the darkness around it. It didn't have features exactly, just this vague human shape with long, thin limbs, and what looked like a head bent awkwardly against the ceiling. I should have screamed. Any normal kid would have, but I didn't. I just stared at it, and it seemed to stare back, though it didn't have eyes that I could see. After what felt like forever, I reached over and turned on my bedside lamp. The figure vanished instantly. The next night, same thing, and the next. Always at 3 a.m., always in the same corner of my closet, always disappearing when I turned on the light. I started to expect it, even wait for it. Here's the really messed up part. I wasn't scared of it. Not really. I mean, I was terrified of what it was and why it was there, but I didn't feel threatened. If anything, with my sister turning into a monster and my mom checking out emotionally, the Shadow Man felt like company. I started talking to it, just whispering in the dark before I turned on the lamp. Simple stuff at first, asking its name, telling it about my day at school. It never answered, at least not with words, but sometimes the static on the TV would get louder when I asked certain questions, like it was trying to respond. One night, after a particularly bad fight with Caitlin where she called me worthless and said she wished I'd never been born, I cried myself to sleep. That night, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed the Shadow Man came out of the closet and sat on the edge of my bed. It reached out one of its long, impossibly thin arms and stroked my hair. In the dream, I felt safe, protected, loved, even. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in weeks. The dreams became regular. In them, the Shadow Man would hold me, rock me, comfort me. Sometimes it felt so real that I'd wake up with the physical sensation of having been embraced. My hair would be messed up on one side, as if someone had been stroking it. About 3 months after we moved in, I was homesick from school. Mom had to work, so she left me alone. I was old enough to stay by myself for a few hours. I was laying in bed, half asleep, when I felt the mattress sink like someone was sitting on it. Then I felt arms wrap around me, squeezing me tight. Too tight. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The pressure increased until I thought my ribs would crack. Just when I thought I couldn't breathe anymore, it stopped. The weight lifted from the bed, and I was alone again. That same day, I noticed something under my desk that I'd never seen before. Carved into the wood on the underside were the words, "Mary Got's a baby." The carving looked old, the edges worn smooth. I ran my fingers over it, wondering who Mary was and why someone had carved that message. A few days later, I overheard a neighbor talking to my mom about the building next door, the old residential school. They were planning to renovate it into a community center, but construction kept getting delayed. The neighbor said workers were quitting because of weird stuff happening. One worker had found words carved into the bathroom stalls. "Mary got a baby." My blood went cold, the exact same phrase that was under my desk. That night, I worked up the courage to ask the shadow man about Mary. "Who is she? Did you know her?" The TV static grew so loud it hurt my ears, and the temperature in my room dropped so suddenly that frost formed on my window. The shadow man seemed to grow larger, stretching up the wall of my closet until it was almost touching the ceiling. For the first time, I felt afraid of it. I turned on my lamp, and it vanished. The next day, I snuck into the old school building through a broken window. I don't know what possessed me to do something so dangerous, but I felt drawn there. The inside was dusty and dark, with peeling paint and broken furniture scattered around. I found the bathroom easily enough. The workers had already started renovating that part, and there, scratched into one of the stall doors, were the words, "Mary got a baby." Below it, in fresher-looking scratches, was another message. "Mary died here, baby too." I ran home and locked myself in my room. That night, I didn't wait for 3 a.m. I turned to the closet and spoke directly to the darkness. "Did you know Mary? Is that why you're here?" No response. Are you Mary's baby?" The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged in front of my face. The closet door, which had been ajar, slammed shut with such force that it cracked the frame. I didn't sleep at all that night. A couple weeks later, a local newspaper ran a story about the apartments. During construction, they discovered evidence of unmarked graves on the property. Children who had died at the residential school and been buried without proper ceremonies or even notifications to their families. The article mentioned that many indigenous elders had warned against building there, saying the land needed to be properly honored first. Our apartment complex was built on top of dead children. We moved out a month later. Mom couldn't take it anymore. Caitlin had become so violent that she'd put her fist through a wall during an argument. Mom was drinking daily, and I'd lost so much weight that my teacher had called social services to check on us. I thought leaving would end it. It didn't. The shadow man followed me. Not right away. The first few months in our new place were peaceful. But eventually, the familiar patterns started again. The TV turning on at 3 a.m., the hockey stick moving positions, and finally, the shadow man hunched in my new closet. It's been over a decade now. We've moved twice more, even to a different province. I'm in my 20s, living on my own, and still, it finds me. Always at 3 a.m., always in the closet, always watching. I've done research over the years. I learned that the residential school next to our apartment was notorious for its high death rate among students. Disease, abuse, neglect. Children died regularly, and many were buried in unmarked graves on the property. A girl named Mary was mentioned in some of the historical records. She was 14 when she arrived at the school, already pregnant from an assault that had happened in her home community. Both she and her baby died in childbirth in 1952. I don't know why the shadow man attached itself to me. I don't know if it's Mary or her baby or something else entirely from that place of suffering. Sometimes I think it's protecting me. Other times I worry it's claimed me for some purpose I don't understand. All I know is that it's 3 a.m. now as I type this. My closet door is open, and I'm not alone. Story 18. I'm still not sure if I should even be writing this down. Part of me thinks maybe it's better to just forget it happened and move on with my life. But it's been 3 months since that night, and I can't stop thinking about it. I need to get this out of my head. This all happened back in January when COVID finally caught up with me. I'd been so careful for so long, working from home, wearing masks, limiting my social circle. But my 7-year-old son, Jake, brought it home from school, and within days, my husband, Mark, tested positive too. I held out hope I might somehow dodge it, but the headache that started on a Tuesday morning told me otherwise. By that afternoon, I had a fever of 102. and the at-home test showed 2 lines before the liquid had even finished spreading across the strip. Mark and I decided I should isolate in our bedroom since he was already on the mend and could take care of Jake. We have a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, so I could stay completely separate from them. The first few days were pretty standard COVID misery. Body aches, fever, fatigue, that weird brain fog where you can't even focus enough to watch TV. Mark would leave food and medicine outside the door, knock, and then I'd wait until he was gone to retrieve it. We texted constantly, even though he was just downstairs. I could hear Jake playing and laughing sometimes, which made me feel both happy and incredibly lonely. By day 5, I was in rough shape. My fever had been hovering around 103 despite taking Tylenol and Advil in rotation. That evening was particularly bad. I remember checking my temperature around 10 o'clock, 104.1. I texted Mark, who wanted to take me to the ER, but I insisted I just needed to sleep it off. He reluctantly agreed, but made me promise to let him know if it got any higher. I took more Tylenol, drank some water, and changed into a fresh t-shirt because I was sweating through everything. I remember how the fabric felt cold and damp against my skin almost immediately. I was shivering but burning up at the same time. I fell into a fitful sleep with the TV on low for comfort, the blue light flickering across the darkened room. I woke up at exactly 3:17 according to my phone. Something had pulled me from sleep. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling, that sensation you get when someone is watching you. The TV had gone to the screensaver, so the room was much darker than when I'd fallen asleep. I lay still for a moment, my heart immediately racing. The fever made everything feel dreamlike and hazy, but I was definitely awake. Then I saw her. Standing between the foot of my bed and the closet door was a woman, a tall, thin woman with long, dark hair hanging down past her shoulders. She wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. The edges of her silhouette seemed to waver and blur, almost like she was emitting smoke or vapor. I couldn't make out her face clearly in the darkness, but I could tell she was looking directly at me. I froze, completely froze. I couldn't even breathe. It was like my lungs had forgotten how to work. My first coherent thought was that I must be hallucinating from the fever. But I felt so lucid in that moment. The cold sweat on my skin, the weight of the blanket, the digital clock numbers glowing on my nightstand. Everything else felt real. The woman didn't move or speak. She just stood there, about 7 feet away from me. The air in the room felt different, heavier, colder. I remember thinking how strange it was that I wasn't screaming. It was like my fear had transcended panic and landed somewhere beyond it, in some eerie, calm place. Then, something happened that I still can't explain. The motion-activated nightlight in my bathroom suddenly flickered on. It's one of those little plug-in lights that only activates when it detects movement in the dark. I'd installed it years ago so I wouldn't have to turn on the bright overhead light during middle-of-the-night bathroom trips. My eyes instinctively darted toward the sudden light coming from the bathroom doorway. It was just for a second, literally just a reflexive glance. But when I looked back to where the woman had been standing, she was gone. In her place was just the jacket I'd hung on the back of my closet door weeks ago, a dark blue zip-up hoodie. But here's the thing. I know what I saw wasn't the jacket. The woman was taller, more defined, and that strange, smoky quality around her edges. A jacket doesn't look like that. Plus, she wasn't positioned where the jacket was hanging. She was a good 3 feet in front of the door. As I stared at the empty space where she had been, trying to make sense of what had just happened, the bathroom nightlight went off. I hadn't seen anyone go into the bathroom. There was no movement to trigger it turning on in the first place, and no reason for it to turn off again. I lunged for the lamp on my nightstand, almost knocking it over in my panic. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grasp the switch. When the light finally came on, I grabbed my phone and checked the time again. Only 2 minutes had passed since I'd woken up. I turned on the TV, put the volume up and sat up against the headboard. No way was I going back to sleep. I texted Mark, but I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just said I wasn't feeling well and couldn't sleep. He offered to come up, but I told him not to, partly because of COVID protocols, but honestly, I was terrified of him opening the door and somehow letting that, whatever it was, out of my room and near my family. I stayed awake for as long as I could, keeping every light on. I searched online for COVID hallucinations and found some articles about neurological symptoms, which momentarily calmed me. But then I remembered the bathroom light. If it was all in my head, how did the motion sensor light turn on and off? I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke up to daylight streaming through the windows. My fever had broken during the night. My temperature was down to 99.8. I felt physically better, but mentally I was a wreck. Throughout that day I kept replaying what I'd seen. I examined the jacket multiple times. I tested the bathroom nightlight, walking past it to see how sensitive the motion detector was. It only activated when something actually moved in its range. It wouldn't turn on from movement in the bedroom area where I'd seen the woman standing. I didn't sleep well for the rest of my isolation. I kept the TV and a lamp on all night. I positioned my phone to record video while I slept, but nothing unusual ever appeared in the footage. After 3 more days, I tested negative and rejoined my family downstairs, but I was jumpy and distracted. Mark noticed something was off and asked what was wrong. I finally told him what I'd seen, trying to make it sound less terrifying than it was. He was sympathetic, but as expected, suggested it was just a fever dream or hallucination. "Fevers can make you see weird things," he said. "Remember when Jake had that ear infection and thought there were dinosaurs in his room?" But this was different. It wasn't like a dream or even a typical hallucination. It felt real in a way I can't fully explain. And that bathroom light, I still can't figure that out. I've been sleeping in our bedroom again for months now, and nothing similar has happened since. Sometimes I convince myself it really was just the fever playing tricks on my brain. But other times, usually when I wake up in the middle of the night, I find myself staring at that space between the bed and the closet door, half expecting to see her again. I've done some research on fever hallucinations and on paranormal experiences. I've found stories somewhat similar to mine, but nothing that exactly matches what I experienced. I'm not normally the type of person who believes in ghosts or supernatural things. I've always been pretty pragmatic and logical, but this experience has left me questioning a lot of what I thought I knew. Was she some kind of ghost? A manifestation of my fever, something my subconscious created from stress and illness, or something else entirely? I don't know. All I know is what I saw, and that it felt completely real in the moment. The strangest part is that I didn't feel threatened exactly. Despite being terrified, I never felt like the woman meant me harm. There was no malevolence in her presence, just a sense of wrongness, of something that shouldn't be there. Sometimes I wonder if she was trying to communicate something to me, or if she was just as surprised to see me as I was to see her. I'm better now, physically completely recovered from COVID. But that night changed something in me. I find myself more aware of the peripheral spaces in my vision, more attuned to subtle changes in a room's atmosphere. I still sleep with a small light on, and I've accidentally unplugged that motion sensor nightlight in the bathroom. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night. Maybe it really was just the fever. But sometimes, when I'm alone in our bedroom and the house is quiet, I swear I can feel a slight chill in that spot where she stood, watching me through the darkness with eyes I could sense more than see. Story 19. I still remember the day we moved to Pine Ridge like it was yesterday, even though it's been over 20 years now. I was 10 years old, and my mom had just married Rick, my stepdad. He got this new job at some manufacturing plant that required us to relocate to this tiny town I'd never even heard of before. The house was nothing special, just a small brick place surrounded by farmland, but my mom kept saying how it was such a good deal and how we were so lucky to find it. The first few days were pretty normal, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and trying to make the place feel like home. I remember noticing there was some kind of Native American historical site not far from our house. You could actually walk there in about 15 minutes. I thought that was kind of cool at first, though I never actually visited it. Now I wonder if that had something to do with what happened. Rick's new job had this weird schedule where he had to wake up at 4 in the morning, which meant our whole household routine changed. He insisted that everyone be in bed by 9, with all the lights out. My mom didn't seem to mind, but I hated it. I was used to staying up later, and lying in bed in complete darkness just made me restless. It was during our first week there when it started. I was lying in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling in the pitch-black room. I couldn't have been asleep. I remember being frustrated because I couldn't fall asleep. Then suddenly, the strangest sensation came over me. It felt like I was floating. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was looking down at myself in the bed. I was somehow on the ceiling, staring down at my own body. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was just stuck there, watching myself from above. The worst part wasn't even the out-of-body experience. It was the overwhelming sense of dread and fear that came with it, like something was very wrong, and I was in danger. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few minutes. Then, suddenly, I snapped back into my body with this violent jerk that made me gasp for air. The next morning, I told my mom what happened. She just ruffled my hair and said, "Sounds like you had a nightmare, buddy." But I knew I hadn't been asleep. I tried to explain that to her, but she wasn't really listening. She was busy making Rick's lunch for work, and I could tell she thought I was just making stuff up or exaggerating. That night, I was terrified to go to bed. I begged to keep my door open, at least a crack, and after some whining, my mom agreed. I lay there in the dark, eyes wide open, afraid to close them. The house made all these unfamiliar creaks and groans that I wasn't used to yet. I must have been lying there for an hour when I felt it again, this weird tingling sensation all over my body. It started at my feet and moved up to my head, and with it came this crushing fear. It wasn't like being scared of a movie or worried about a test at school. This was primal terror, the kind that makes your heart feel like it's going to explode. I looked toward my bedroom door, which was cracked open about 6 inches, and that's when I saw it for the first time. Standing in the hallway, partially visible through the crack, was a figure. It wasn't exactly person-shaped, but it wasn't not person-shaped either. It was like a solid shadow, darker than the darkness around it. It had no features that I could make out, no eyes, no mouth, but I could feel it watching me. I knew it was looking right at me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to move, to get up and run, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was frozen, completely paralyzed. And then the pressure started, first on my chest, like someone was sitting on me, and then around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm going to die in this room and no one will know why. The pressure got worse and worse until spots started appearing in my vision. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I could breathe again. I could move again. And when I looked back at the door, the shadow was gone. It had just disappeared back into the hallway. I spent the rest of that night with my blanket pulled over my head, shaking and crying silently because I didn't want to wake up my mom and Rick. I was terrified the shadow would come back if I made any noise. The next day, I was a mess. I hadn't slept at all, and I could barely focus at school. My teacher actually called my mom because she was concerned about me. When I got home, Mom sat me down and asked what was wrong. I told her everything, about the shadow figure, about how I couldn't breathe or move. She looked worried, but not in the way I needed her to be. She was worried about me, not about what was in our house. "Lucas, honey, it sounds like you're having trouble adjusting to the new place," she said. "Maybe we can get you a nightlight." A nightlight, like that would stop whatever I'd seen. The third night was the worst. I knew it was coming. I could feel it in the air somehow, like the way you can feel a storm approaching. I had begged and pleaded to sleep in my parents' room, but Rick said I was too old for that. that I needed to man up and sleep in my own bed. So there I was again, alone in the dark, waiting for it to come. This time I didn't even have the warning of the tingling sensation. One moment I was alone, and the next, the shadow figure was just there. Not in the hallway, not by the door, but right beside my bed. It seemed to float rather than stand, and it was so black it seemed to absorb what little light there was in the room. And then it reached for me. I could see its arms, or what I thought were arms, extending toward me. I felt the cold before I felt the touch, this bone-deep chill that made my teeth chatter. Then I felt pressure around my neck, like hands wrapping around my throat. Once again, I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle, couldn't make a sound. I was wide awake, looking right at this thing as it choked me. My lungs burned from lack of oxygen. My vision started to tunnel, and all the while this thing just hovered there, faceless but somehow emanating pure malice. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours, but was probably just minutes. Eventually the pressure released and the shadow figure receded, moving backwards until it disappeared into the darkness of my room. The moment I could move again, I ran to my parents' room, sobbing uncontrollably. I refused to go back to my room. I slept on their floor that night, and no amount of coaxing could get me to return to my own bed. The next day, Rick seemed genuinely concerned for the first time. Maybe it was because my mom was upset too, or maybe he finally realized something was seriously wrong. He suggested buying me a small TV for my room, thinking that having some light and sound might help me sleep. I didn't think it would make any difference, but I was desperate for anything that might keep the shadow away. That night, with the TV on, casting a blue glow throughout my room and filling the silence with quiet voices, I waited. I was sure the shadow would come again, TV or no TV, but it didn't. Not that night, and not the night after. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. As long as I kept the TV on, the shadow stayed away. I never told anyone else about what happened. Who would believe me? Even my own mom thought it was just nightmares or an overactive imagination. As I got older, I started researching what might have happened to me. I looked into sleep paralysis, which seemed to match some of what I experienced. The inability to move, the feeling of pressure, even hallucinations. But I was never asleep when these things happened. I was wide awake, staring right at that thing as it tried to choke the life out of me. I researched the history of the area too. Turns out the Native American site near our house was some kind of burial ground or sacred place. The details are fuzzy and hard to verify, but plenty of locals had stories about strange happenings, feelings of being watched, unexplained noises. None of them mentioned a shadow figure though. It's been over 20 years now, and I still sleep with a TV on. I can't sleep in total darkness. I've tried, and the panic attacks are immediate and overwhelming. My wife thinks it's just a quirk, a harmless habit from childhood. I've never told her the full truth. How do you tell someone that you're afraid of the dark? Because once, when you were 10 years old, something that shouldn't exist tried to kill you. I don't know what that shadow was. A ghost? A demon? Some kind of entity that's tied to that land? I don't have answers. Just the visceral memory of cold hands around my throat and the certainty that what I experienced wasn't just in my head. Sometimes, even now, when I'm alone in the house and it's quiet, I feel like I'm being watched, like that thing somehow followed me from Pine Ridge and has been waiting all these years for me to slip up to fall asleep without the protective glow of the TV. So I keep the TV on, and I keep looking for answers, because I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and whatever that shadow man was, it was real. As real as the scars it left on my mind, as real as the fear that still grips me whenever the lights go out. Story 20. I still get goosebumps talking about this, even though it's been almost 20 years. I've never been a believer in the paranormal. I'm usually the first person to look for the logical explanation. But what happened in that house when I was a kid changed me forever. We moved into the house when I was 9. It was in this brand new development, one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where all the houses look pretty similar. My parents were excited because it was bigger than our old place, had a finished basement, and was in a better school district. My sister Emma was 11 at the time, and at first we were both thrilled about having more space. The weird stuff started almost immediately, but it was subtle enough that we didn't connect the dots right away. The basement bathroom was the first red flag. There was nothing visibly wrong with it, no weird stains or anything, but both Emma and I hated it from day one. I remember the first time I went down there to use it. I'd gotten halfway through washing my hands when this overwhelming feeling of being watched crashed over me. The bathroom had no windows, just this dim yellowish light fixture, and I swear the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. I bolted upstairs with wet hands, heart pounding. That night at dinner, Emma mentioned that she didn't like the basement bathroom either. "It feels wrong," she said, and I nodded vigorously. My parents exchanged a look but didn't say much about it. Dad just shrugged and said, "More upstairs bathroom time for you two then." About 3 weeks after moving in, Mum started mentioning the shadows. Our staircase was in the center of the house, connecting all 3 levels. There were no windows nearby, nothing that could cast moving shadows, but Mom kept seeing what she described as dark shapes moving up and down the stairs, especially in the late afternoon. "It's like someone's walking up and down, but when I look, there's nobody there," she told Dad one evening, when they thought Emma and I couldn't hear. "I keep thinking it's one of the kids, but they're always somewhere else when I check." Dad was skeptical, suggesting it might be shadows from cars passing by, but the nearest street was too far away for that. Mom just shook her head. Our 2 dogs, Buddy and Max, both golden retrievers, started acting weird too. They loved sleeping on the bottom few steps of the staircase, but sometimes they'd suddenly jerk awake, staring up the stairs with their ears perked. Then they'd whimper and scramble away like something had scared them. I witnessed this happen at least a dozen times, and it always made the hair on my arms stand up. One evening about 6 months after we moved in, we were all in the living room watching TV when we heard a loud crash from the hallway. Dad jumped up to check and we heard him swear, which was rare for him. We all went to look. The large family portrait we'd hung when we first moved in had fallen off the wall. The weird part? The nail was still in the wall, perfectly intact, and the wire on the back of the frame wasn't broken. It was like someone had carefully lifted it off the nail and then dropped it. The glass was shattered all over the floor. "That's been hanging there for over a year," Mom said, her voice shaky. "How does that just fall?" Dad mumbled something about the house settling, but I could tell he was unsettled too. As time went on, Mom became more convinced something was off about the house. She did some research into the area's history and discovered our neighborhood was built on land that had once belonged to a local First Nations tribe. She theorized that maybe we were experiencing some kind of spiritual disturbance related to that. Dad always changed the subject when she brought it up. The basement became a particular hotspot. None of us liked being down there alone, though it was finished nicely with a rec room and guest bedroom. When I was 10, I had a few friends over for a sleepover in the basement. We were watching movies and eating junk food, normal kid stuff. Dad was away on a business trip, so it was just Mom upstairs with Emma. Around 11 at night, Mom came down to check on us and asked if we were ready to turn in. We begged for one more movie. She sighed and said, "Fine, but who's going to turn off the lights when you're done?" We all volunteered, and she went back upstairs. Not 5 minutes later, every light in the basement suddenly went out. My friends and I screamed, thinking Mom was playing a joke, but then we heard her footsteps rushing down the stairs. "What happened?" she asked, flipping the light switch. "Nothing happened." "That's weird." We ended up finishing the movie with just the TV screen for light, all of us huddled together on the couch. The next morning, Mom checked the lights, flipping the switch, and they worked perfectly. No blown fuse, no loose wiring, nothing to explain why they'd all gone out simultaneously. My friends didn't come over for sleepovers much after that. The light fixtures throughout the house became an ongoing issue. We were constantly replacing bulbs, especially in the hallways and stairwell. Dad complained about the electric bill and even had an electrician come check the wiring, but they found nothing wrong. Sometimes a bulb would burn out the same day we replaced it. But the incident that still haunts me, the one I can't explain away no matter how hard I try, happened when I was 11, about 2 years after we moved in. I'd always been a sound sleeper, but I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. My room was dark except for the glow of my digital alarm clock, which read 3:18 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me, but then I felt it, a presence in the room. I lay completely still, afraid to move. Then I noticed something in my peripheral vision. Slowly, I turned my head toward my desk in the corner of the room. There was an elderly woman sitting in my desk chair. She wasn't transparent or floating or anything dramatic like you see in movies. She looked solid, real, an old woman with silver gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dark dress with a pearl necklace. Her hands were folded in her lap and she was just sitting there looking at me. I wanted to scream but couldn't make a sound. My whole body was frozen with fear. The strangest part was that while I was terrified, I didn't feel threatened. There was no sense of malice or anger coming from her. She seemed almost sad. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then I blinked and she was gone. Just vanished. The chair was empty. I spent the rest of the night with my blanket pulled over my head, afraid to look around my room again. In the morning, I told Mom what I'd seen. I expected her to dismiss it as a nightmare, but she went pale and sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "What did she look like again?" she asked. I described the woman in detail, the pearls, the gray hair, the dark dress. Mom didn't say anything for a long moment, then quietly told me she'd seen the same woman at the top of the stairs one night when she was up late reading. We never told Dad or Emma. I think Mom was worried about freaking us out even more. But after that, things escalated. The dogs refused to go upstairs altogether. Emma complained about hearing footsteps in her room at night. The lights were going out daily. 3 months after my encounter with the old woman, Dad got a job offer in another city. Mom jumped at the chance to move, and we were packed and gone within 6 weeks. The house sold quickly, despite the hot real estate market cooling down at the time. I often wonder about the family that moved in after us. Did they experience the same things? Did the old woman in the chair appear to them too? I've been tempted to go back and knock on the door, but I'm afraid of what I might learn, or worse, what might recognize me and follow me home. I've never seen anything like that again in any place I've lived since. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was all just an overactive imagination, house noises and coincidences. But then I remember the woman's eyes, tired, knowing eyes that had seen decades more than mine, and I know what I saw was real. The strangest part, I never felt like she wanted to harm us. It was more like she was waiting for something or someone. Maybe she's still there, sitting in a chair, watching as new families come and go, bound to that house for reasons I'll never understand. Story 21. I've never been able to forget what happened to me when I was 7. Even now, 20 years later, I still can't bring myself to sleep in basements. My husband thinks I'm being silly, but he wasn't there. He didn't experience what I did in that old house in northern Ontario. My family moved there in the summer of 2003. It was this huge, century-old farmhouse with peeling white paint and creaky floorboards. From the moment we pulled into the driveway, something felt off about it. But my parents were excited. It was spacious and affordable, and my dad had just gotten a new job in the area. The house had 3 bedrooms upstairs, but my parents decided I should take the finished room in the basement. It was the biggest bedroom besides the master, and they thought I'd enjoy having my own space. I remember my mom helping me set up my stuffed animals on the bed, trying to make it feel cozy, but there was something about that room that made my skin crawl from day one. The basement had this musty smell that never went away, no matter how many scented candles my mom burned. The walls were painted a faded yellow that might have been cheerful once, but now just looked sickly. My bed was pushed against the far wall facing the door, and there was a small window high up near the ceiling that let in a bit of light during the day. At night, though, it was pitch black down there. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. I'd go to bed reluctantly each night, pulling my blankets up to my chin and trying to fall asleep before the house settled into its nighttime creaks and groans. My dad had installed a nightlight for me, which cast weird shadows on the walls, but it was better than complete darkness. Then came that night in September. I'd been asleep for a few hours when something woke me up. It wasn't a noise exactly, more like a feeling. You know when you can tell someone's staring at you? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck, that's what I felt. I opened my eyes and immediately knew something was wrong. The room felt different. Heavier somehow, like the air itself had thickened. My nightlight was still on, but the shadows it cast seemed darker, more defined. I sat up in bed, clutching my favorite teddy bear to my chest. "Hello?" I whispered, immediately regretting it. What if something answered? Nothing did, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. I needed to pee, which meant going upstairs to the bathroom. The basement didn't have one. Under normal circumstances, I would have been too scared to get out of bed, but my bladder was giving me no choice. I slid out from under my covers, keeping my eyes on the darkest corner of the room where the feeling seemed to be coming from. The floor was ice cold against my bare feet as I tiptoed to the door. I reached for the handle, turned it, and pulled. It didn't budge. I thought maybe I'd turned it the wrong way, so I tried again. Nothing. I used both hands this time, pulling with all my might, but the door wouldn't open. It wasn't locked. There wasn't even a lock on it, but it felt like someone was holding it shut from the other side. "Mom!" I called out, my voice small and shaky. "Dad?" No response. They were 2 floors away, probably sound asleep. I pulled harder, my heart pounding in my chest. The door remained firmly closed as if it had been nailed shut. Panic began to rise in my throat. "Mom, Dad, help me!" I screamed, pounding on the door with my fists. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I yanked at the handle again and again. The feeling of being watched had intensified. Whatever was in the room with me was getting closer. I could feel it. The air behind me felt cold, like someone had opened a freezer. I didn't dare turn around. I threw my entire body weight against the door, sobbing hysterically. "Please, somebody help me." And then, just as suddenly as it had stuck, the door flew open. I nearly fell flat on my face, catching myself on the basement stairs. I didn't look back. I ran up those stairs faster than I'd ever moved in my life, taking them 2 at a time despite my short legs. I raced through the main floor and up the second set of stairs to the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and flicking on every light switch I could reach. I sat on the bathroom floor, back pressed against the tub, staring at the door. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I expected my parents to come see what all the commotion was about, but the house remained silent. Somehow, they hadn't heard my screams. I stayed there all night, too terrified to move. I didn't even use the toilet despite my full bladder. I just sat there, knees pulled to my chest, jumping at every little sound. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I remember is my mom finding me there in the morning. "Mia? What on earth are you doing sleeping in here?" she asked, genuinely confused. I burst into tears again, telling her everything between sobs, about waking up, about the door, about the feeling that something was in my room. My dad came in partway through my story, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "It was just a nightmare, kiddo," he said dismissively. "Doors don't just lock by themselves." "It wasn't locked," I insisted. "Something was holding it shut. I couldn't open it." My mom looked concerned. She believed me, I could tell, but my dad just rolled his eyes. "Well, you're not sleeping on the bathroom floor tonight," he said firmly. "You'll go back to your room and see there's nothing to be afraid of." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm never going back down there. Never." My mom put her arm around me. "Let's have breakfast and talk about this when everyone's calmer," she suggested, giving my dad a look. For the next week, I refused to sleep in the basement. I'd camp out on the living room couch or sneak back to the bathroom floor after my parents went to bed. They'd find me in the morning and we'd have the same argument all over again. My dad thought I was being ridiculous, but my mom eventually convinced him to move my bed upstairs to the small office space off their bedroom. It was barely big enough for my twin bed and dresser, but I didn't care. I wasn't going back to the basement. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Strange things started happening all over the house. The TV in the living room would change channels by itself, flipping rapidly through all the stations before stopping on static. The first time it happened, my dad blamed me for sitting on the remote. By the fifth time, even he couldn't explain it away. There was a touch lamp in the dining room that would cycle through its brightness settings, low, medium, high, off, when no one was near it. We'd be eating dinner, and suddenly the lighting would start changing on its own. My dad replaced the lamp, but the new one did the same thing. The kitchen lights would switch off when you were in the middle of cooking or doing dishes. My mom hated that the most. She'd be chopping vegetables and suddenly be plunged into darkness. I remember her cutting her finger once because of it, and the string of curse words that followed was the only time I ever heard her swear. But the worst incident after that first night happened about 3 months later. I was sleeping in my new upstairs room when I woke up feeling cold. My curtains were blowing even though the window was closed, like there was a breeze coming from under my bed. I pulled my blanket tighter around me, and that's when I saw her. A woman was standing in the corner of my room. I could only see her silhouette, tall and thin, with long hair that seemed to float around her head. She wasn't moving, just standing there watching me. I was too terrified to scream. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10 in my head before opening them again. She was gone, but the cold remained, and I swear I could hear breathing that wasn't my own. I didn't tell my parents about that one. My dad already thought I was making things up, and even my mom had started giving me concerned looks when I talked about the haunted house. Instead, I started sleeping with my bedside lamp on, positioned so it illuminated every corner of my room. Then there was the incident with the spiders. This one still makes my skin crawl. I was playing across the street in this muddy area where the neighborhood kids would dig for treasures. I found what looked like an old cow bone buried in the mud. It was yellowed and smooth, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I brought it home to show my parents. My mom made me leave it on the back porch to dry out, and I forgot about it until the next morning. When I went to check on it, the bone was covered in daddy-long-legged spiders. Not just a few, thousands of them, swarming all over it like it was some kind of spider magnet. I screamed for my mom, who came running. Even she was freaked out. She told me to stay back while she got the garden hose to spray them off. But here's the weird part. They wouldn't wash away. The water just made them scatter, and they started heading toward the house, toward me. I ran inside, but for days afterward, we kept finding daddy long legs all over the house, in my room especially. I'd wake up with them crawling on my walls, my ceiling, my bed frame. My mom would vacuum them up, but more would appear. It was like they were following me. One night I woke up to find one dangling above my face, slowly lowering itself toward me. I screamed so loud our neighbors called to check if everything was okay. My mom finally threw the bone as far into the woods behind our house as she could, and the spider invasion gradually stopped. We moved out of that house 6 months later. My dad got transferred again, and I've never been so happy to pack up and leave a place. I don't know what was in that house, but it wasn't just old house noises like my dad tried to claim. Sometimes I think about the family that moved in after us. I wonder if they experienced the same things. I wonder if some little kid is sleeping in that basement room right now, feeling that same sense of being watched. I've tried researching the history of the house over the years, but I've never found anything conclusive. No recorded deaths, no tragic stories. Just an old farmhouse in northern Ontario that, for whatever reason, didn't want me there. All I know is that 20 years later, I still sleep with a nightlight. I still can't stand basements. And whenever I see a daddy long-legged spider, I immediately leave the room. Story 22. I still get chills when I think about what happened in that apartment. My wife Sarah and I had been married just 2 months when we found what seemed like the perfect place in the NoHo Arts District. It was a steal for LA, a one-bedroom in this beautiful 1920s building with those classic details you just don't find anymore. Hardwood floors, crown molding, those old brass doorknobs that have this satisfying weight to them, the kind of place where you could imagine glamorous people from old Hollywood having lived. We were so excited to start our lives together there. I remember the day we moved in, July 18th, 2019. It was brutally hot, and we were sweating bullets carrying boxes up those 3 flights of stairs, but we didn't care. We were just happy to have found an affordable place with character in a neighborhood we loved. The first few months were perfect. We'd spend weekends exploring the neighborhood, finding our favorite coffee shops, decorating our little space. Sarah hung these vintage curtains in the living room that caught the afternoon light in this way that made the whole place glow golden. We'd joke about hearing the buildings settle at night, those typical old building creaks and groans, nothing that ever bothered us until that night in November. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had an early meeting the next day and had gone to bed around 10, which was early for me. Sarah joined me about an hour later. I'm normally a deep sleeper. Sarah always jokes that a tornado could hit and I'd sleep through it. But something woke me up around 3 in the morning. Footsteps, clear as day, right in our living room. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again. Slow, deliberate steps on our hardwood floors. Then the sound of something being moved, like someone had picked up a book from our coffee table and set it back down. I froze. Sarah was asleep next to me, but as I shifted to sit up, she woke immediately. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear in the dim light coming through our bedroom window. Another step, then another. Someone was definitely in our apartment. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We kept a revolver in the nightstand. My dad had given it to me years ago when I lived in a sketchy neighborhood during college. I'd never fired it outside of a shooting range, but I reached for it now, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Call 911, I whispered to Sarah, who was already clutching her phone. She nodded and dialed, whispering our address to the dispatcher. The footsteps continued, moving from the living room toward the kitchen, then back again. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. That somehow made it worse, like they knew we were there and weren't concerned about being caught. I got out of bed, trying to make as little noise as possible. Our bedroom door was closed, and I positioned myself facing it, the gun in my hands. Sarah was behind me, still on the phone with the dispatcher, who was saying police were on their way. Then something happened that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. We saw shadows moving in the gap between the door and the floor, unmistakable. Someone was walking back and forth right outside our bedroom. I raised the gun, aiming at the door, my finger resting beside the trigger. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. The shadows moved again, then stopped directly in front of our door. We both held our breath. There was a moment of complete silence. I couldn't even hear the dispatcher anymore, though Sarah still had the phone to her ear. Then, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, the shadow moved away. The footsteps receded toward the living room again. After a minute or so, they stopped entirely. "They're saying officers are 2 minutes out," Sarah whispered. I nodded, still staring at the door. Had the intruder heard her on the phone? Were they hiding, waiting for us to come out, or had they left somehow? After another minute of silence, I made a decision. "I'm going to check," I said. "Daniel, no," Sarah pleaded. "Wait for the police." "If they're gone, I want to make sure they can't get back in," I explained, trying to sound braver than I felt. "And if they're still here, they're cornered. I have the gun." Before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for the doorknob, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open, leading with the gun. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I crept forward, checking the bathroom first since it was closest. Empty. Then the living room and kitchen, also empty. Our apartment wasn't large. There was nowhere else for someone to hide. I checked the front door. It was locked, with the deadbolt and the chain still in place. I went to the windows. all locked from the inside. By the time the police arrived, I had checked every possible entrance 3 times. They did another thorough search, checking closets, under the bed, even our kitchen cabinets, though most weren't big enough to hide a child, let alone an adult. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. There was literally no sign that anyone had been in our apartment besides us. The officers were understanding but clearly skeptical. One asked if we'd been watching horror movies before bed. Another suggested it might have been noises from a neighboring apartment that sounded closer than they were. They took a report, but I could tell they thought we'd imagined it or overreacted to normal building noises. But we hadn't imagined those footsteps or the shadows under the door. Sarah and I both experienced it. Both heard the same things. After the police left, neither of us could sleep. We sat in the living room with all the lights on until dawn, trying to come up with logical explanations. Maybe there was a secret entrance we didn't know about, but our apartment had been thoroughly searched. Maybe someone had a key, but that wouldn't explain how they got past the chain lock. We eventually convinced ourselves it must have been some weird acoustical anomaly, sounds from another apartment or even the street somehow sounding like they were inside our place. It was the only explanation that made any sense, even if it didn't really explain the shadows we'd seen. Life went back to normal after a few days. We were jumpy for a while, but nothing else happened, and gradually we relaxed. I installed some extra security features, a doorbell camera, window alarms, which helped us feel safer. By January, the incident had become just a strange story we told at dinner parties, until it happened again. It was February 12th. I remember because we'd been out for an early Valentine's dinner, came home, watched a movie, and went to bed around midnight. This time I woke up to the sound of something being dragged across our floor, like furniture moving. I sat bolt upright, instantly wide awake. Sarah was already awake beside me, clutching my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, reaching for the gun again. The dragging sound stopped, replaced by those same deliberate footsteps we'd heard before, walking from the living room to the kitchen, opening a cabinet, closing it, walking back. "This isn't possible," I muttered. Our new security system hadn't been triggered. The doorbell camera hadn't detected any motion. Sarah was already on the phone with 911 again. I stood up, gun in hand, and approached the bedroom door just like last time. And just like last time, I could see shadows moving in the gap below the door. But this time, something was different. The shadows seemed darker, more solid somehow, and they moved differently. Not just passing by the door, but stopping, lingering, like whoever was out there was standing right in front of our bedroom, listening to us. My hands were shaking so badly, I was afraid I might accidentally pull the trigger. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Police are on their way," Sarah whispered from behind me. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the door. The shadow was still there, completely still now. Then slowly it seemed to lower, like the person was crouching down to look through the keyhole. I raised the gun, aiming directly at the door, where a person's head would be if they were standing on the other side. "I'm armed," I shouted. "The police are coming. Get out now." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow disappeared from under the door. I heard footsteps moving quickly away, toward the front of the apartment. Something inside me snapped. I was tired of being terrorized in my own home. Before I could think better of it, I lunged for the door, threw it open, and rushed into the hallway, gun raised. Again, nothing. The living room was empty. But this time, just as my hand touched the bedroom doorknob, I heard the most chilling sound. Our front door opened and then slammed shut. The chain lock hit against the door with that distinctive metallic sound it makes. Someone had just left our apartment. I ran to the front door, ready to chase after whoever it was, and stopped dead in my tracks. The chain was still in place. The deadbolt was still locked. The door was completely secure. I stood there staring at the door, my brain unable to process what I'd just experienced. I had heard the door open and close. I had heard the chain rattle against the door as it slammed, but that was physically impossible if the chain was still engaged. The police arrived minutes later and, just like before, found nothing. No signs of entry, no signs of disturbance, nothing stolen or moved. Our doorbell camera had recorded no one coming or going. The window alarms hadn't been triggered. One officer, an older guy who seemed more sympathetic than the others, took me aside. "Look," he said quietly, "I'm not saying I don't believe you, but have you considered that this building is nearly 100 years old? There's history here. Sometimes—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Sometimes what?" I pressed. He shrugged. "Sometimes old buildings have old stories attached to them. Might be worth asking your neighbors if they've experienced anything similar." I did ask around in the days that followed. Most people just gave me weird looks, but one elderly woman who'd lived in the building for decades nodded knowingly when I described what happened. "Apartment 3B, she said. "That's the Franklin apartment. There was a murder-suicide there back in the 30s. Husband caught his wife with another man, shot them both, then himself. They say he still comes back looking for cheaters." I didn't tell her that we lived in 3B, and neither Sarah nor I were cheating. But the story unsettled me deeply. We broke our lease and moved out at the end of February, lost our security deposit and had to pay a penalty, but we didn't care. No amount of money was worth spending another night in that apartment. It's been over a year now, and we've had no strange experiences in our new place, but I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, convinced I hear footsteps in our living room, and I still can't explain how someone or something could enter our apartment through locked doors, make noise, cast shadows, and then leave again through a door that remained chained from the inside. Some things just don't have logical explanations, I guess. But I know what we experienced was real, and I hope to God I never experience anything like it again.